Yes.
Jolly. Raji was in the championship game.
And Cutler looking like, what happened? Here we go again. Let's see. We're going to roll, and we're just going
pressure.
to throw.
Who's he even thrown it to?
Dude, he threw it. He so wanted to be Brett Favre, like throwing on the run off of his back leg. He always thought he could complete that pass. There's only one guy that had the arm to do that.
Brett Favre?
Montana would throw on the run. To bring up the Montana talk, he would throw on the run, but they were finesse passes. It's way different. Way different.
Yeah. Oh, low snap.
Here, yeah. Almost
Hurry up, right to Al Harris. I remember this.
To him. Not
Can't
even
just
close.
like gives him that little shove. I mean, it's just like.
And he shakes his head like, I can't believe that just happened.
Right, like.
Go have a.
There wasn't a fan at this game who couldn't believe that just happened.
I mean, these
barely any pressure. One guy in his face. Underthrown, just underthrown. Charles Woodson. I wonder how many of these went to Charles Woodson. I see. The receiver stumbled, but even still, it was underthrown.
Doesn't matter. It was underthrown. If anything, you should have overthrew him.
Yeah. All right.
Look at him not even looking off. He's not even looking off, dude. He's staring at the receiver the whole way. And again, I think that's something that separates. You know, we've talked about that a few times, right? What separates those great, like a Manning and even a Brady, they can look off and complete that pass. That's not an easy thing to do, obviously.
Right. No pressure.
Was he like throwing to the official? What is I do like
didn't have anybody in his face there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the look off is something that like
I think at this level, it's extremely important.
No pressure. He had all day to throw this ball. Was there a little push off there? Maybe. Maybe by today's standards, I want to see the replay here. It looked like there might have been a little push. Nope.
Oh no! Oh no!
Oh man!
No.
Wow.
No push needed.
All right, no pressure.
Slings it high. And I mean, no pressure, and you do that. I just
Wow, the Jets beat Buffalo 38-7. Oh, that's.
There's been a lot of talk down here about, or there has been talk like Cutler's probably the best quarterback we ever had. I don't see it.
I don't know if I see that either. He could be a Hall of Famer for the Packers. He's thrown to so many Packers players so far. We're not even a quarter way through this video. All right, I think that was just good defense. I don't know that was on
I can't argue with that one.
Yeah, that one I can forgive. Sam Shields, he was a good corner.
And again, I obviously could not do it. Look at those jerseys! Wow.
Oof. Those are some sharp jerseys. I like those throwback color rush.
So here
Not a lot of pressure. That was just a poor decision, I think. It just kind of heaved it.
Was it? Yeah, that was a good play. That was a good defensive play. But obviously reading where he was looking, right? I mean, for the safety to come over like that and pick that off.
No pressure.
Dude, he's just staring.
Overthrown. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the championship game, isn't it? No, this is the last one was the championship game.
Is that Brandon Marshall he's throwing to?
I think so. Wow. Or is that a Williams? I can't tell. It's a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
Oh man, he had to leap for it. It was even overthrown for him to intercept.
Okay, in the shotgun. What do we got?
A little bit of pressure, but not a lot. That was good defense. I don't know that was on Cutler. That was just that was a lucky pick, I think.
Oh, okay.
A little scrambling.
I remember this play for some reason.
Yeah.
Look at that. 3 guys in the area.
Really, I'd call that 4 guys. That was quadruple coverage. And it was underthrown again. Not a lot of pressure.
That's a duck.
Oof.
Wow, what a duck that was. Almost like it slipped out of his hand or something.
Yeah, that was Brandon Marshall he was throwing it to, too. Oof. That was some good defense. I don't think you can blame that one on Cutler. His guy fell down, but no pressure. What? That was a bad throw. That was an impressively bad throw. Casey Hayward was a good player, but that was pretty rough.
He threw it right to him, dude. It's like he thought it was one of our wide receivers just like sitting in his own pocket there somewhere that he could throw it to.
No kidding. Oh, that's funny.
Here he goes. He's on the run.
All day.
Okay, well this one is just chucking. I can't but again,
Hail Mary over the line.
Oh yes. Fourth quarter. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, that was
good
a bobble.
Defense.
Yeah, that was really good defense. I don't think that
was that AJ Hawk?
No, that was Clay Matthews.
Clay Matthews. That's right, Clay Matthews.
Matt Forte. What a running back, though.
Yeah. Went to the Jets and didn't do much.
Yep. No pressure. Had all day. Underthrown.
Wow. What was he? I mean, he threw it like a laser to the Packers.
Yeah. Boy, if Sam Shields would have cut that back inside, he might have gone all the way. Here we go. No pressure. Had all the, that was tipped. Yeah, that was tipped. It was a bad throw, but
yeah.
Julius Peppers would love to have him back. All right. Pressure. Tipped again. All right. I think he hit his own guy in the helmet there.
Thank goodness this is almost over.
Right.
That's bad throw. I mean, you throw it into double coverage again.
Well, and
is that Clay Matthews
being covered by a linebacker. Yeah, that was Matthews.
Ooh,
that
kind of tackle is kind of illegal nowadays, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they flagged him there.
Okay, I was gonna say.
Yeah, I think they added 15, and we ended up with the ball at like the 5.
They should have flagged Cutler for being bad.
Yep. Man. You know, they don't do a lot of this line drawing anymore. I have to say, I'm a little disappointed with that. Like, Madden used to do a really nice job.
It's a good play.
Yeah.
By Matthews.
Boy, but still, I mean, wide receiver being essentially covered by a linebacker there. Most quarterbacks, I feel like, would exploit that. Oof. What a catch, too.
Yeah, it was a great catch. That was a great
there are wide receivers that can't catch that well. Nope. And we do not necessarily condone White Claw. Well, there you go. I mean, that is what I like to call poking the bear.
Yes.
Reminding them of the good old days of Jay Cutler. And this is why you guys call back to the 85 Bears all the time, I think. So, shout out to Wisco Sports Weekly, who had that video that followed up that. But the owner of the video with every interception, that's Joaquim Neto, Neto, here on YouTube. Feel free to head over and subscribe to his channel. Joaquim, subscribe to us as well. We enjoyed that very much. If you enjoy Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear, we'll be back next week with another great episode and hopefully a lot more to talk about. Maybe good things for both teams. We'll have to find out. And you never know in Bears country this year. Maybe another controversy pops up. Have a great one.
Aren't you a little old for Video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you.
And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I hope you've brought your tea made by the Jedi Tea Council, because we are the Jedi Council that are graying. And we're excited because this is our 10th episode, and we are again venturing into the storytelling universe of Andor, starring, of course, Cassian Andor, aka...
Wait, I missed that because I was coughing. What?
Diego Luna?
Cassian Andor, portrayed by... Thank you.
Diego Luna?
Oh, there we go.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Diego Luna. And, all these Star Wars names are hard to pronounce, including the actors. Go figure. But, a very exciting episode. We are moving into the fourth, therefore the next trifecta of episodes, where Cassian Andor is now off the Junker world / mining world and into the world of the Rebellion. I very much look forward to our dissection by Jedi Master Celia Moss. And as a first-time viewer, I have to say that this episode really tapped into a lot of those things I've wanted to see in the, shall we say, behind-the-scenes Star Wars action of the galaxy. So, without further ado, Jedi Master Celia Moss, illuminate us on what brings us into the fourth episode of Andor.
Thank you, Master Urza Master. Thank you, Master Lord Uther. And thanks to you at home and abroad and in galaxies far, far away. This is our 10th Graying Jedi. It is our 4th following and chronicling Andor. The episode is called Altani, and it first aired on September 28th, 2022. As Master referenced, the show was designed in almost like Lego blocks, in which episodes and storylines would extend and carry over into little mini trilogies, and then a new storyline or arc would come forward. So you might feel surprised when you actually watch episode 4, because it actually feels like a different show. Like we have gone in a completely new environment. We have not 1, not 2, but 9 new characters that make their first appearances in this episode alone, while at the moment leaving other characters that we've already come to know, like B2 EMO and Bix Colleen and Marva, completely off camera and for the moment sidelined by these new developments in this saga. So it can be a little disconcerting, a little jarring, but wow. If the first 3 episodes were all about world building and the world of Ferrex and the corporate sector, this is The Heist. One of my favorite of all storytelling devices and arcs. Let's get a team together and let's plan a robbery. Everything from The Italian Job and Ocean's 12, even Gene Hackman and Danny DeVito going head-to-head in David Mamet's Heist. We have seen over the years in both film and television this play out, depending on your point of view, with much fanfare and success. And the key is in the details. And this episode does not spare us any of those details. So this episode 4, as well as the next 2, will be directed by Susanna White, her first appearance on the show. She is a British television and film director. Her most notable film credit, she did the sequel to Nanny McPhee with Emma Thompson. Wait, there was a sequel to Nanny McPhee? Yes, there was. It came out in 2000.
I don't even know the original movie, so whatever.
It came out in 2010. Star Wars veteran Ewan McGregor, I believe, was in Nanny McPhee Returns, as it was called here in the stateside. It made a ton of money in its native lands, not so much in this country, but don't blame Emma Thompson for that. She's divine. So Susanna White directed that. She also has worked for the BBC, doing an updating of Jane Eyre. She's worked for HBO, doing Generation Kill, an Iraq War set miniseries that is harrowing, gripping, and very much recommended. Also did episodes of Boardwalk Empire, their 30s set Prohibition gangster saga. And then she moved over to Showtime and did episodes of Billions, and Masters of Sex. So she is well versed behind the camera, and she will be taking us on the Aldani heist. The writer, at least half his name probably seemed familiar. It's Dan Gilroy. Now, Dan is the brother to Tony. Dan has a fraternal twin, John, and if you've been watching the credits and not skipping them, you'll note that John Gilroy is editing the series. So it is truly a family affair with Tony as showrunner creator, his brother Dan pitching in on the screenwriting, and his Dan's fraternal twin John doing the crisp editing that we are enjoying. But Dan is a successful writer in his own right. Most recently, he contributed to Kong Skull Island, which was much, much more entertaining than it had any right to be. And if you haven't seen Kong Skull Island and said, I'm not watching a King Kong movie set in Vietnam, that's how I felt. And then I watched it, and it was ridiculously entertaining. So Mr. Gilroy was credited with that. He did a Jake Gyllenhaal thriller about the underside of television news called Nightcrawler. Had nothing to do with the X-Men, but he wrote and directed that. He wrote and directed a courtroom drama with Denzel Washington a few Thanksgivings ago called Roman J. Israel Esquire, with some crackling writing.
That was also good.
He contributed to Real Steel with Hugh Jackman. He got his start. He got his start doing a somewhat silly Emilio Estevez, Mick Jagger, Anthony Hopkins futuristic thriller called Free Jack. And the reason I bring up Free Jack from 1992 is it's where Dan Gilroy met his once future and current wife. He is married to Renee Russo, whom you will remember from Lethal Weapon, Major League, and any number. So the Gilroys are a blessed bunch, and Dan is married to Renee, and that's why she was in Nightcrawler as the ambitious TV journalist and so on and so forth. So that was Dan.
Fantastic.
Now I mentioned that there were nine new characters that show up in this episode. The biggest by far is Senator Mon Mothma, who is played by Genevieve O'Reilly. Initially, she was cast. Mon Mothma was a character introduced in 1983's Return of the Jedi. Genevieve O'Reilly was brought in to play her slightly younger version in Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3. But many of her scenes with Senator Amidala, Natalie Portman, and Senator Organa, played by Jimmy Smits, ended up on the cutting room floor. They can still be viewed on the DVDs and Blu-rays if you have Revenge of the Sith in those formats, and perhaps even on the streaming versions. But most of her screen time was cut for that picture. She returned in Rogue One, once again, with a severe haircut and leading the Rebel Alliance from the Yavin 4 base right before the Death Star interceded. She voiced the character of Mon Mothma for Star Wars Rebels and Dave Filoni in an episode, and she returned the favor again, appearing live action in Dave Filoni's Ahsoka, which we just covered here on The Graying Jedi. So basically, when you think Mon Mothma these days, you're thinking Genevieve O'Reilly, and I will just say briefly, we learned more about that character and who she is and her dynamic in this single episode of Andor, then she was allowed to really express herself more of a figurehead rebel leader, cut from a very stock cloth in all of the others. And we'll talk about Mon Mothma a little later in the show. But wow, as far as suddenly the character, it's such a good turn that when you go back and watch a Rogue One or an Ahsoka, then you have a completely different appreciation for who that character actually is and what she stands for. We also met briefly, and we will see her more, spoiler alert, Cyril's mother, Edie, played by Catherine Hunter, a woman who will greet her now unemployed son with a harsh slap across the face and then a motherly hug. And so she will be a factor. We met the Major in the Imperial Security Bureau, played by Anton Lesser, also a Game of Thrones alumnus. And nobody runs a staff meeting like the Major. We'll talk about that. And we also met Dedra, who works in the ISB and reports to the Major. And her character is a fascinating one. There's so much to discuss. And then finally, Cassian has been recruited by the rebellion to commit crime, to rob an Imperial payroll for an entire sector. And he's being thrown in with a ragtag bunch of rebels, none of whom trust him, none of whom know him, and yet they're placing their lives on the line, presumably with his participation. And so we meet Vel and Cinta and Skeen and Nemec. These are all members of the team that are going to be infiltrating an Imperial garrison and making off with their payroll while not getting caught by troopers, TIE fighters, and the like. You might recognize Skeen. He's kind of the quiet, hulking one in the background right now. Got a sort of a dodgy look about him. That's played by Eben Moss Bacharach. You would recognize him from the terrific Hulu show The Bear as Cousin Richie. He also did a nice cameo in the Jennifer Lawrence, Matthew Broderick comedy this summer, No Hard Feelings. So he's one to watch. I didn't even mention Luthen, who is a master of disguise and fronts an art gallery on Coruscant when he's not out acting like the stern rebel commander. And he puts on a wig and an affectation as a delightful showman. And he's got an assistant, Clea, who also will play a factor in later narratives and so forth. And so those two are operating in plain sight while trying to match the rebellion's foot soldiers with the funding, courtesy of Senator Mon Mothma. But that's also now coming under close scrutiny. So, folks, like I said, so much to go. And I think Jedi Master, Ursa Master, having experiences for the first time during this cycle as we go through Andor, I'd like to hear his and Lord Uther's thoughts about how this very grown-up, very adult Star Wars took another leap forward here. And once again, of all the things we'll probably say about this, I'm not saying it's inappropriate for children. I'm just saying that they probably will leave the room. This is not made for the 6-year-olds who will soon be on your porch with lightsabers asking for Halloween candy. This is, grown-ups only, and not because it has racy language or extreme violence or anything like that. It's just such a compelling adult drama that I just don't know that Go ahead, Lord Uther.
No one's going to be running out and buying a Luthen action figure.
Well, there you go.
Probably what is not going to. Well, I would. Yeah, that's true. But I don't think my 13-year-old son or my 11-year-old daughter will be doing that. But anyway, Urza, master of masters, Urza.
Well,
whatever.
If I may,
I'll let you go. But yeah,
I was blown away. Yet again, this show has done exactly what I've always wanted to see with the Star Wars. Anything, movie, TV show, whatever. It's brought in that sort of, I almost want to call it like a political drama. It's like a House of Cards or a West Wing Star Wars episode. And you get this nuanced, layered method of storytelling, which I really deeply appreciate from, I say adult oriented, but that kind of gives it that AO rating connotation. And I don't mean that. I mean something literally oriented towards adult tendencies, like, you know, reading the newspaper kind of thing, not, you know, taking off of the clothing. Which, I mean, you know, they don't need to do to make it compelling, which is such a refreshing thing to see. Because I feel like when people craft shows these days and they're trying to appeal to an audience of 18 plus, they aim for the lowest brow to maximize the dollar. This is not like that at all. They are aiming for this beautifully crafted storyline of layered political intrigue and layered non-Jedi versus the Empire storytelling. And that is so refreshing. And, you know, for as much as I want it to be lightsabers and X-Wings and Y-Wings and A-Wings and AT-AT walkers and Ewoks, like, I really like seeing this. I can't gush enough over, you know, Luthen and his goofy disguise, but it's perfect for the character he plays. It suits exactly who he comes off as, and the flip of the switch where he becomes, you know, the rebel behind the scenes with Mon Mothma in the back of the art gallery is just, oh man. I mean, that was like, it gives you chills. The acting,
and how he browbeats Val into accepting Cassian on, I mean, he's got a story for everybody. He tells Cassian, you know, this is what we're going to do, and I'm going to pay you all of that. And then he goes out to Val and, like, he's, you know, he barks at her. Look at me. This is, you know, you're a child. I've just bought you, you know, redundancy. Like, you should be thanking me. Stellan Skarsgård just, yeah.
The command Stellan Skarsgård has of the sequences he's in is rarity for the silver screen or the small screen. There's nothing more you could say about that praises it enough. It's just, I love him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Disney can do no wrong with their casting. I mean, and I'm not saying that because I'm pandering to anybody in the room. I'm saying that because they make unbelievable choices, and they always seem to hit. Mon Mothma, the casting there, and getting the same actress from Episode 3 and having that continuity really lends credence to the franchise. Not to mention the fact that she comes across as, you know, like Julia Louis-Dreyfus on Veep, or the name escapes me on House of Cards. I forget. But
yeah,
gravitas.
His wife, right? Yes.
Yes, and just this presence that feels so very real, but so
Robin Wright.
Yeah, just like on the razor's edge, you know, and playing the right part for the right reasons, despite the obvious, you know, horrific danger she's in, and then having a spouse like she has, which, I mean, we can't not mention the obvious political marriage that's going on there, and it's Coruscant. Like, this is what I, as an adult, always imagined Coruscant to be, is this, like, very House of Cards-esque living space for all of these politicals and these you know, special interests and these lobbyists. And it's Capitol Hill turned into its own planet with, by the way, if you're familiar with Greater Canon, a dark underbelly literally below the cloud line. I hope they get into that. I don't know.
And that's what I love when we see Cyril, who's been disgraced and fired and all of that from his job. He returns to Coruscant, and we see him descend. And it's not, I mean, it's not as if there's assassins sitting there with cigarettes, accosting him.
Right.
But you can see that Mon Mothma lives up here, and here is Cyril, the middle class or even lower middle class, forced down here in the shadows. There's almost no light. It's just a very depressing architecture to it, all of the same brutalist style. Like, I just love how you can just tell the story of who this guy is or where his situation is just by
it feels very Soviet era.
Yes.
Like construction. Like it feels like he is that party member that worked his butt off to get all the way up the corporate ladder and ingratiate himself with the KGB. And now he's getting knocked down a few pegs, and he's, again, this is the story. The whole story is of radicalization. In whatever direction you end up going, how do you get there? This is how you get there. You grow up in the block, and you ingratiate yourself with the party. I mean, it is a. I mean, especially having grown up in the very early post-Soviet era, like this is the Rocky IV of Star Wars for me. Like this is pretty freaking awesome stuff, and like it doesn't need Rocky versus Ivan Drago. Like you can tell a lot more story if you take the main part out of it and tell everything around it. And we talk about the future of Star Wars a lot, and I know this show's been out for a little while. But these are the types of things, the types of stories you could absolutely, it's boundless. You have no limit to the stories you can tell within the bounds of, 4, 5, and 6, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or somewhere in between there. It's a lot of history that goes on outside of the Skywalkers. So I was also very intrigued by the sort of Scottish Highlanders who are leading this rebellion. And of course, it's just like Sean Connery going to the Highlands to rescue Connor MacLeod from the Clan MacLeod. And, here's Cassian Andor getting dumped off in the Highlands, and you cannot die, you stupid fool. It's going to succeed because the whole show is called Andor and he appears in Rogue One. So it's like, I can't wait to see how they pull it off. I don't care that I know the end. That's the coolest thing that I think this show does. Is like, we know where this is going, but it's still really, really good. And that's something where, like, the prequels, if I may, are unsuccessful. Because we know where things are going with Anakin Skywalker, but telling that story was not crafted in a way that was as compelling as what we're seeing with Cassian Andor.
Yes. With that said, if you want a masterclass in dialogue, look no further than Luthen and Cassian on the ship as they're flying to their destination, and the way Luthen takes someone who thinks he's very street smart like Cassian and just molds him into what's going to be a rebel, right? I mean, he totally manipulates him, knowing his background, knowing that Cassian lied about being in that battle, right? Like, he knows all those little pieces. And we've talked about radicalization, and I think that was Urza Master who brought that up. And I think it was Master Cillian Moss. But anyway, we all jumped on board the radicalization piece. And it's fascinating because I think I had a really good conversation with a friend of mine yesterday about some things that are going on in the world. And he said, we might be so far removed from certain events that we can't relate to what's going on or totally understand what's happening. I don't think we really know what it means to be radicalized. And I think we're seeing how it happens. To me, I also call it selling. Like, Luthen sold Cassian on doing all of this stuff. Like, it's a sell job. It's like I say when I teach, I got to sell the kids. They got to buy into what I'm doing, right? And so we see a masterclass in that. And I think it's some of the best dialogue in that episode. Maybe not the entire series, but it definitely stands out. because you can just see that manipulation happen. And it's almost like Cassian goes, he's like, oh yeah, I do hate them. I should join this. I mean, you can almost see him going through those phases of understanding that he is this person that Luthen thinks he is, even though he didn't, at the beginning, Cassian wasn't on board with it. So I think it's just fantastic. I also love that I hadn't seen a TIE fighter or a stormtrooper, which we still haven't seen a stormtrooper yet, but we finally saw a TIE fighter.
And I'm going to jump right on that. This show does something I never thought it would do, and it makes a TIE fighter scary again on how they presented it. Like, sudden, the volume, it's very quiet, and all of a sudden it screams across the atmosphere with that familiar TIE fighter sound. I never thought a TIE fighter could be, like, unnerving after being exposed so many times in the cartoons and the, but my God, when that jumps across, yes.
And I'll add one more thing in here. We're talking about we love a good heist movie. That's why Solo was a great film. That film got lambasted. I think it was a setup, quite honestly. But I mean, like, that was a good movie. I think it was a fantastic movie. And why? Because part of it was a heist, which you want to see. I mean, it's good stuff.
It's just robbing the train. It's always fun. Even if it's not the best story, it's always fun. Passenger 57.
When this episode...
Firefly, one of the best episodes of Firefly was when they were literally taking a part of a train. Like, they were going to take it.
Yeah.
By the way, talk about a podcast we should do. Firefly is...
When this episode ends of The Graying Jedi, we're actually going to plot our own heist, because it's like a bucket list thing. We need to figure out and then assign code names and have little diagrams so
if you want to be part of that heist, add a comment below and click that subscribe button, and make sure to share us with all your friends and family so that we don't ever... Wait a minute, we're going to get caught in this heist. Well, you should still subscribe.
I love again, Luthen. I won't even say he's two-faced, but he tells Cassian, "You're important. I came for you." And then he goes out and tells Vel out of earshot, "Hey, he's disposable. I'm renting him." And what I thought was great is Vel, the leader of this heist, who's been placed in charge of it. She's upset. They've been eating dirt and sleeping on stones, and he's getting paid 200,000 credits. And Luthen just matter of fact about it. I'm paying him. Watch her later in the episode where the same suspicions are cast upon, well, who is this guy? Why is he coming in so late? How are we supposed to trust him? She sticks her neck out for someone she's literally just met and doesn't trust herself. And it's a phenomenal acting job, as Uther is talking about. Like, when you hear her defend him, it's almost as if they were lifelong pals and grew up together. And you know that she doesn't even believe what she's telling them, but she has to as the leader. Otherwise, the whole thing, falls apart. So I thought that was a tremendous moment for this character that we're just introduced to, as far as I trust,
And Luthen plays on that, right? Because he's like, and that's how he gets her. Like, talk about a manipulator. Because she's arguing with him, and he goes, "You want to lead? This is part of leading." Like, he just goes right at her with it, and she's like, "Oh yeah, you're right." And she's got to buy into it again. Again, buying what he's selling.
Exactly.
It's so key.
And when he meets with Mon Mothma, under the guise of buying her husband a birthday present. And I love the political husband who is jamming her up at home by inviting people to dinner that she wants nothing to do with and doesn't agree with politically, and her Imperials who are, creating havoc under the guise of authority. I love when he says, like, "Rumor has it you bought me a present," and she snaps, "It's going back." I just love that's a telling moment on their marriage and her character and so forth. But when Luthen and Mon Mothma are there, and this will be explored a little bit further in episodes, I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but you can already see the seeds planted in this conversation. So she's the political face, right? She's not directly tied to the rebellion, and she's been moving money and drawing upon her stores to give to agents like Luthen, who then spread it around various cells and various mini plots, if you will, throughout the galaxy. So she's the respectable face and is trying to maintain that plausible deniability that I have anything to do with this. Of course, it's all just accounting and all of that. But it's the contrast, right? And again, we will explore this probably further down the road. It's the contrast between what she thinks the rebellion is, which is I write a check or I deliver funds, and what Luthen is doing, which is I'm getting my hands dirty. I've got people out there who depend on me. I need the money that you promised, or else this whole thing goes belly up, and then they can turn on us and turn us in. And I mean, so it's a fascinating dichotomy set up about sort of like, what Mon Mothma thinks she's doing. It's a noble cause. We talked about the cause versus what it takes to actually, get the job done. And Luthen is nothing more. He is a ruthless pragmatist. Like, I don't believe anything exists for him but the cause, based on how we've met him early. There is no individual or institution that he will support except this rebellion against the Empire.
But is he really getting his hands dirty? He's helping the other people. He's helping them get their hands dirty. He's that centerpiece. He's helping that wheel turn, and by he's the middleman, right?
Right.
He's that pivot point, which leads me to this question, and hopefully you two can kind of jump in on this. How much, at what point or what cause are you willing to sell your soul, in a sense, to see your cause happen? Because we're starting to see some of that, right? Like, how far are you willing to go? Are you willing to manipulate people? Are you willing to lose people? Are you willing to lie out of both sides of your mouth for your cause? He's telling Cassian how he got there for him, and like you said, he's telling, what's her name, Vel, how he's expendable. She's lying to her people. Oh, I can vouch for this guy. Like, how far are you willing to go for the cause? I guess that's my question. I mean, are we seeing it? I don't know. Well, what do you guys think?
I think that's any rebellion, right? I mean, if you're... I'm reminded, as I often am, of a great Cillian Murphy movie, The Wind That Shakes the Barley.
Yes.
Where are your real lines? Are you truly fighting for a cause, or are you trying to find a way to quickly end the conflict? Are you a Sinn Féin, or are you really aiming for an ideal? And I think that's the beauty of the story being told here, is that we don't know yet. We don't know. Does Mon Mothma want a quick end to the Empire to bring back just the Senate? Or does Mon Mothma want something greater than that? Does Luthen want to be kind of this influential merchant type, shady middleman, warlord type? Or, does he really have a dedication to, power to the people? And that's something that... I think at every level of rebellion in Star Wars, and it's all allegory, right? So like it's a great, do I say Campbellian, Joseph Campbell type myth of setting up the life cycle of the hero, because what we're seeing, none of these characters are heroes, none of them. They're all flawed, human, realistic portrayals of people. They are not the, how do I want to put it? They are not the Skywalkers. They are not the epitome of hero's journey. They are not the epitome of the Sith. They're not the villains either. They are the cogs in the machine that have to play their role to whatever end that may entail. And that's why it can be so appealing to an adult audience.
So, at what point does it make it different from the Empire? I'm sorry, but at what point does it disseminate? and make it different. What's
And
what
I think
makes them right?
I think
and
that's the
then-
point. I think that's the point he's trying to show is that when you get down to the grassroots and the weeds, the rebellion, might employ ruthless tactics or all of that as such as the empire. Look at the empire from the ISB, which we were introduced to here. This very sterile bureaucracy where they all have meetings and quarterly reports that are due, and you'd never know from the Star Wars that we grew up with Star Destroyers raining down, attacks on planets and TIE fighters intercepting, and you would never know that what we see in the ISB, like any of that is going on. Like this feels like, a well-run office with people who will stab you in the back if you, get out of your lane. And that's how we made Dedra, who we can see right away is a comer. She is not going to be restrained by office protocols or niceties. And she's drawn into this because the Starpath unit that Cassian was trying to fence ended up being stolen from another sector that she had jurisdiction over. Ergo, she tries to elbow her way in here. One of her co-workers says, "Hey, not so fast. She's already got enough on her plate. Tell her to leave me alone." And for the moment, the hires at B agree, but he gives her the little pep talk and says, "You have to be better than everybody else. That's why you're here." And so it's fascinating because we're not conditioned to hate Dedra upon first meeting her. Like we see somebody who's, like we might imagine ourselves if we were trying to climb the corporate ladder, if the corporation was the empire. Like this is not somebody that you're saying, oh, they slaughtered younglings, and they must be, because don't forget, this is all, post episode 3 and the Jedis have been driven away and, thought extinct and the children were slaughtered by Anakin and so forth. Like a lot of crimes and atrocities here on this very planet. And yet, like I say, she takes a briefcase. If they had the intergalactic version of Starbucks, she'd probably be sipping it on her way in. And I just love the idea of presenting the Empire as something other than just this oppressive Darth Vader on the bridge. We will find the rebel spies and destroy them. To Ursa Master's point, like this is what was really going on, right? The camera was over here on the Skywalkers giving us all the highlights and the pod racing and the duels and all of that on Dagobah and Cloud City and Hoth. But here's where the real rubber met the road is, did you get your quarterly reports in? And that's, to me, like I say, that doesn't get the action figures sold, but it sure makes for compelling inner office bickering.
Well, go ahead, Master Urza, Master.
I hate to say it, but that's kind of what makes this more entertaining than even the original Star Wars movies, is because it feels so real life. The evil of the Empire is really the evil of corporate, living. You're the copier. If there's an episode about a copier breaking, like this is Office Space, really. And that's it. It's almost comical in a way. It's so real life, despite being sci-fi. In a galaxy far, far away, they still have corporate bureaucracy bullcrap. The people who are looking to climb the ladder as fast as possible, or who are so deep in the Kool-Aid, like our young lieutenant deputy. Yeah, that's the real plotting nature behind evil, and that's if you want to go with the archetype, you can watch 4, 5, and 6. But if you want to go with the real life, that's Andor. And the real rebellion here is the people who just don't want central government, I guess. Are they really aiming to bring back the Republic, or do they just not want the Imperials mucking up their game on whatever planet or sector they're in? And that's, Uther, you bring up a really good point. Like, which is actually worse if you think about it? And that's the future of Star Wars is telling those stories, because they're definitely pre Return of the Jedi. There are definitely worlds, sectors, large swaths of people who probably did very well under the Empire, who may not be evil at all. They're just people. They may even be very good people, who took care of masses of hungry, starving children. And then all of a sudden, the Empire vacuum is there, and they're like, oh no, what do we do now? This darn rebellion, we want the First Order. And that's how the First Order rises. You get that ebb and flow, and that's the cyclical nature, which Ahsoka does so well of addressing. And also, somehow, this all ties back to the wind that shakes the barley. Like, I hate to say it, but this is the whole argument of, are you going to sign the Doyle, or are you going to work for something new, different, and better? I mean, this is Balin's storyline. This is setting the foundation for what we see in Ahsoka, which is amazing. So watching this after seeing Ahsoka, I'm like, mind blow here and there, even though this occurs so far before that series. It's incredible, really. It's really, like, when we say this is a show for adults, it's almost more than that, because adults can go out and enjoy the Star Wars, right? The Star Wars, as they called it back in the day. Because it's an entertaining show. It's a love story. It's hero's journey, all that fun romantic stuff. This is really the world building type story. This is sitting down and grinding out a D&D campaign over months and months with your buddies. Like, this is where you truly can escape reality, only to realize that it's still reality. You still go to the bar, and you still strike out with the attractive barmaid. Like, you still go to the office, and you still strike out when, the person with a little more tenure than you decides you're getting too uppity and layeth the smack down upon thee, kind of thing. I mean, it's fun in a way that really sounds like it shouldn't be fun, and it's refreshing to see a franchise take a risk like that. It's kind of like, say, a Star Trek series coming up with an animated slapstick TV show.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and this is what we've wanted, right? We 1 through 9 were so black and white, good and bad, which is, and I'm going to say,
and mythology,
justifiable. Yeah. Well, yeah, justifiably so. I'm going to say that, right? But that's what we were loving about Ahsoka, is that we really think this cycle is going to be broken. I mean, my dog is even barking and agreeing with me right now upstairs.
Arf, arf, woof,
arf,
woof.
Arf. Which and Urza Master, you're still a youngling yourself. Obviously, Master Cillian Moss and I are a little bit older. And now that I'm older, I really question, what's evil, what's bad, what's good. I mean, what makes the Empire worse than what the Rebellion's going to be, or the New Republic is, because we even see it in Ahsoka. They start getting bogged down in their own mess too. So what is right and what is wrong? Now, obviously, I don't advocate for evil people, but when we're talking about, like what you're saying, you've got Vader up here and Palpatine up here, and they're doing their thing. But
you got them over here, and they're going to run around over here on Mustafar, and
over here, yeah. But you've got millions
and millions
of people supporting Palpatine and Vader. I mean, that's what we're getting. And again, like you said, it might just be the guy trying to make a credit so he can make his payment and feed his kids some sloppy cereal in the morning. Like, what I mean,
green milk or blue milk.
Oh God, don't even. I cannot wait to argue with Cillian Moss about those movies. But I just think it's bringing so much of that to the forefront, and that's what makes. And let me tell you something, Master Urza Master of Urza Masters, it's going to get so much better. Which I didn't think it could. And I was kind of reflecting on that today, watching this a second time around. Like, I wonder if this can get better, and it just gets so much better. So much better.
We pointed out in last week's episode, Nicholas Bertel's score, that he redid the title sequence 12 times for each episode. So I don't know if anyone was listening this week, but this one was emphasized with pounding drums. which was different than the strings, which was different than the synthesizers, but again, the same chords and the same melody can be discerned when listening properly. Using location filmmaking, and again, I love how Lucasfilm and ILM have developed the stagecraft and being able to create just about any environment that they can, imagine in order to allow scenes, from Ahsoka and Kenobi and the Mandalorian and so forth. And it's technology. I mean, it's visionary and it moves storytelling forward. But having said that, and we mentioned this with the sequences set on Ferrix, there is something about like going out there. Like they're not mistaking the Scottish Highlands, which is where a lot of this episode was shot. You're not mistaking that for, Santa Barbara, or, it's these people, and they seem small and insignificant amongst these majestic green hills and valleys, but you feel like you're there, and in a world that's already, in a universe that's already very, pushing the boundaries of what's your suspension of disbelief and everything like that. It grounds you in a way, and it's an environment, again, Star Wars is limited, obviously. We're not going out into deep space to get this stuff. So, I mean, we have deserts, we have Tatooine and Jakku, and we have, Hoth is an ice planet. And, I mean, they can only do so much with sort of these natural biomes. But this does not look like an environment that we've spent a lot of time with, in 9 movies or so forth. Like, it has a distinct character all its own. And I applaud them for, whether it costs more money or not, to build the township in Ferrix, with sets and so that it feels like you can move from point A to point B, and navigate your way through. Or here, going out there and shooting for a month in these highlands and giving it that space, that epic scope. I think that was very good. I love the dynamic of the crew in the sense, we have the young idealist who believes in the cause with Nemec, and we have the sort of self-centered mercenary type in Skeen, and we have Cinta and Vel and Harriman, and we have an Imperial turncoat who's also risking his neck on the line. He's not too crazy about seeing Cassian there. And then, they've a little Doc Brown joke when they're showing off the plan. And they apologize. It's not built to scale, but I mean, again, if you're a fan of this type of storytelling, it's great when they say, all right, at 1800 hours we will be here, and then we will take this shuttle, and in there is a hangar bay, and we will deactivate the alarms, and it all sounds, when they're describing it, like, well, what could possibly go wrong? And of course, in the back of our heads, we realize that, well, if it's going to work that smoothly, then we probably don't have a show. So, and that leads me to, we get into the Imperial Security Bureau, we get into the heist, we get into Mon Mothma's complicated marriage and her position in the Senate. We get into, with the exception of Cyril and his buddies at the corporate authority who are demoted and dressed down and as the Empire takes over their system. None of the characters that we've spent 3 episodes getting to know on Ferrix, or Kenari, where Cassian was, abducted by Marva and her husband Clem. Like, I know we watch a lot of TV. Star Trek: Strange New Worlds is a bold example of one of our shows that we like to do here at Pending Rebrand. And we've had episodes where Christopher Pike has been, not featured, either out of the picture entirely or does a brief cameo, and the main thrust of the story is Spock or any of the other supporting characters there, number one. But this is a whole different paradigm. Like, the show that we thought we were watching for the first 3 episodes, at least at the moment, is not the show we're watching right now. And it's seamless. I mean, that you talk about taking a creative risk. They didn't do a time jump 30 years later. Andor's, I mean, they literally just switched locations, brought in a whole bunch of new characters, like a great novel or literary piece, and just expect you to stay ahead of the wave and roll with it. Now, does that mean we will never return to that junk world? I don't want to spoil things, but there's a fair bet we might see that planet again. But like I say, it's just we went from the excitement and high stakes of them fleeing Ferrex to this a completely different thing. There are no blasters fired in here. There's no fisticuffs or lightsaber battles again, we have a TIE fighter that screams by overhead on patrol that scares the dickens out of you when you're listening on your soundbar at home. But the show is immensely compelling without any of the usual fallbacks. Like Andor gets into a fight with his fellow heist mates, and they brawl right by the campfire. It's a show that trusts you enough to think that the office standoff between Dedra and her cohorts is just as exciting as Luthen and Cassian blasting their way out of a room filled with heavy machinery. And it can do both very well, but you don't need to rely on one or the other to get you there. And in this case, the most exciting edge of your seat stuff is what characters are thinking and saying to each other. And like I say, this isn't even Tony Gilroy; it's his brother Dan doing this, and he's just as up to the task as his sibling. So that's where I come off on that. When you can make a show exciting just about whether or not she's going to get to investigate the star path, even though it's not her sector, like that's it's money.
Hats off, absolutely. Well, I hate to say we've belabored this episode. I don't think we have, but I think it's a great time to offer up our ratings on our patented Graying Jedi lightsaber color scale. I'll kick off this week because I think as the newcomer, fresh face to the series, I probably have tipped my hat pretty early how I felt about this episode. I give it a blazing green lightsaber. I'm going to say Yoda in episode 2 green.
That's great.
Which is high praise. I thoroughly loved this episode. Everything top to bottom tantalized me in all the right literary ways. From seeing the dressing down of our trio of officers that kind of got the pooch effed on them by their actions and or inactions. It's kind of nice to see the bad guys get their comeuppance, but then you sort of realize that they're also human and maybe on their way to radicalization. And I'm a big fan of layers and nuance, whether it's the onion of Shrek or the great layering of Shakespearean flicks like Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet. As I believe we mentioned Emma Thompson earlier, so can't not mention Kenneth Branagh in the same breath. I know they're not together anymore, but they'll always be one in my eyes. I loved it. I loved every minute of this episode, from the drums on down, because it was, again, this feels like exactly what I think my heart has always wanted out of Star Wars. A much more realistic feeling, nuanced, adult, again, divorce yourself from the connotations of that word when it comes to entertainment. Not that that's a bad thing either, but this is very much a let's do our taxes type show. Like it entertains you on a sort of deeper, more stimulating level that I think a Star Trek really does a good job of. So to see that in the Star Wars universe is very satisfying for me.
I'll go next.
Okay.
I think we're seeing the evolution. I think we're seeing the evolution of Star Wars. I think we're seeing it here, and I think we're starting to see it with Ahsoka. Obviously on different levels in a sense, right? We're seeing it with our heroes, and we're seeing it with those everyday people that become heroes, right? They're not predestined like we had seen with Star Wars. So yeah, I give it a green glowing lightsaber as well. Obviously, it's my second time viewing, and it's better than the first, to put it mildly. I know where it's going, and it just continues to build in a phenomenal way. So, yes, episode 2 Yoda lightsaber. Go ahead, Cillian Moss.
So I don't like to mix metaphors, but I can think of no finer way to illustrate the color. This is my prized Great Northern Hotel Twin Peaks room key, room 315. And as you can see, it is a deep Pacific Northwest forest green, so clearly earning that's accolades there. And I just want to say further that maybe this is just an interesting off-ramp in the Star Wars superhighway. And again, we've talked about where Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau and other creators, may take the show. And we may be surprised. I think we're going to be surprised next year when we have such offerings as Skeleton Crew and The Acolyte, which are going to take some different tones and different looks. Again, moving sort of beyond the general Skywalker saga storylines. So I don't want to disabuse anybody and say, oh, I wish they made all Star Wars like this, because quite frankly, I think Star Wars is a big enough tent to embrace the mythology, to embrace the serialized adventure storytelling of the Flash Gordons and so forth that inspired George Lucas, and to begin with, the hero's journey that he set his characters on so long ago. Recently, Matthew Vaughn, who is the director of the Kingsman franchise and Kick-Ass and so forth, he's a talented director. I've enjoyed his work. Stardust he did with Michelle Pfeiffer and Robert De Niro, a very underrated fantasy picture. But he made some headlines recently by saying that he wants to reboot Star Wars, A New Hope. He thinks that Star Wars should only be about the Skywalkers, but he thinks that it's time for a brand new take on Han Solo, Leia, Vader. And I mean, I guess that's probably a debate worth having down the road somewhere. But like I say, I don't think we do it justice to just try to limit, and I think sometimes fans get, a little greedy online. They only want Star Wars to be, Tony Gilroy, Examinations of Radicalization, or they only want Star Wars to be Ewoks and plush toys. And like I say, I think if you can embrace and wrap your arms around the storytelling that they're saying, that they're offering us, I think you can find room, for a well-balanced diet of this. And I by no means think that we're going to be getting a ton more of Andors, but Andor might inspire some different choices and some different risks, and that can only be good for the franchise as a whole. So you don't feel like we're plowing the same earth again and again and again. So I mean, my hat's off to Tony Gilroy and his collaborators so far as to what they've done. And like I say, maybe somebody else that just unlocks the door to something even more daring and unusual, and we're like, why didn't we think of that? So
you cannot reboot Excalibur. They tried to do it. You cannot reboot The Godfathers. You'll never do it. Don't even try it with Star Wars. But that's an argument we could have another day, probably.
Right.
Yeah, that could be a whole podcast.
Oh, yes, Gary.
We could do a whole podcast on movies that should never be rebooted. I'll start with Double Impact. How about City Slickers 2? Obviously, the world's best movie ever made, Street Fighter. And you should never reboot Brett Favre's career. That was timeless. Rebooting Star Wars is just that's a farce. Now, rebooting Star Trek V, we could talk. We'll talk about that maybe in a future episode of another show here at Pending Rebrand, which you subscribe if you haven't. Don't miss out on the Warp Core podcast. Don't miss out on future episodes of Us, the Graying Jedi. Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear. weekly, episodic, follows the NFL season, and someday,
we have so much more in store.
someday we'll have even more coming up.
Oh.
So don't sleep. Don't sleep on the Graying Jedi. Don't sleep on Pending Rebrand. Make sure, however, that when you subscribe, you don't only subscribe, but drop us what you think about Cassian Andor and his journey in the comments. Hit that like button, share button with all your friends, family, strangers, neighbors, and that guy at the gas station that has a cell phone who can stream us on YouTube and Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts. I am Urza Master. With me, as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Cilium Maz. We thank you from a galaxy far, far away to right here at home. May the Force be with you.
Aren't you a little old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you.
Then my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am Jedi Master Urza Master. Joining me, as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Cilium Maz. And we are returning for our 11th episode to the world of Andor. And the episode, The Axe Forgets. I have to say, another vessel of an episode, but definitely worthy of discussion. And just let's cut to the chase. Let's try something new. Cilium Maz, take us away with this one.
Thank you, Jedi Master Urza Master. Thank you, Jedi Master Lord Uther. And thanks to all of you neophyte Jedis and Sith running around out there. We've made it through All Hallows Eve with further holidays and merrymaking. Life Day is coming, Star Wars fans. So gather your Wookiees and make sure that you have your globes handy, because that will be much merriment through all the land.
And we're going to live stream that.
We'll live stream Life Day. That would be awesome.
Yes.
All right, so as regular followers of the Graying Jedi, and there's legion of you, are aware that the show that we've been chronicling, Andor, is divided into little mini trilogies, little mini story arcs, which retain the same creatives for the most part through those 3 episodes. So just like last week, this one is directed by Susanna White and written by Dan Gilroy, brother of showrunner Tony Gilroy. And if you want to hear more about their outstanding contributions to the world of cinema television, just go back and see our previous episode right there on the Graying Jedi. And as Jedi Master Urza Master suggested, again, this episode is really about laying out the plan. You know, in every good heist storyline, you have to have the team assembling and getting the ins and outs of what should go right, knowing that it will probably all go spectacularly wrong. Otherwise, it wouldn't make a very good heist storyline. So right now is the calm, literally before the storm, as our characters draw closer and closer to their fates and destinies. But where I want to start with tonight, and there's sort of 2 major threads I think that I took away from this episode. I want to start with how richly developed this world feels already. Don't forget, it was only a couple of episodes ago that we were on the rusting junk planet of Ferrix with Bix Colleen and all of Andor's associates, Marva and B2EMO and so forth, and the corporate authority. And it just feels like that happened in another galaxy far, far away. Because these past couple of episodes, we have been on the highlands of Aldhani, and we've been spending time with this rebellious crew, attempting to take down an imperial payroll, a quarterly payroll for the entire sector. And you feel like you've been watching this show, these characters, for 6 or 7 episodes, and they've done it in 2. And you get just enough of the personality of the players to really feel invested or suspicious of, or etc. And that's marvelous storytelling. We talk about it all the time on the our Star Trek podcast, the Warp Core. When you can have rich characters and characterizations just in a few brief strokes. I offer up, for example, this evening, I mean, we learn about Skeen, played by Eben Moss-Bachrach, of the criminally entertaining FX Hulu show The Bear, set in Chicago. Cousin Richie. My God, you need to see that show if you haven't already. As Skeen, who doesn't trust Andor, doesn't trust anybody, has got his own reasons for joining the rebellion and challenging Andor the entire way here. And even comes up with the signature line, the name that the episode takes it from, and really a simple, powerful metaphor for both Star Wars, and really you could apply it to almost any geopolitical situation. When Andor talks about why he's, his cover story of wanting to join the rebellion to lash out against imperial fascism, it's the idea that the Empire is this soulless bureaucracy that just swallows whole planets, whole civilizations, whole systems, and just keeps marching on. It doesn't look at what it's crushing under its boot. And Dan Gilroy gives that line to Skeen, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. And so, what a powerful illustration of the mindset in this galaxy and what these people, are feeling, because our rebels are, the trees, and the Empire is that axe that's been felling them and deforesting and clearing out brush. And they're a tool, right? I mean, the Empire is simply a tool. It was George Lucas who, when they were making the original New Hope, was trying to explain the concept, which was, at the time, you had to wrap your head around all the different ideas, crazy ideas. What do you mean there's an 8-foot-tall furry thing that barks, and what's a Jedi, etc.? He explained that the rebels were like the guys who built custom hot rods out of spare parts in the junkyard, and the X-wings and the Y-wings and so forth. I mean, in other circumstances, they would barely get off the ground, but they were scrappy and inventive, and they found their way around corners. And the Empire was sleek, assembly line, factory, TIE fighters coming off, every high-grade metal and weapon system that you could do. They were they were the axe, if you will. And that was the difference, right? It was the scrappy underdogs versus the behemoth, and the scrappy underdogs won, or at least changed the balance of power. And I just, like I say, it's a line, and you might even miss it on your first viewing because you're waiting for things to explode or some more visual eye candy. But if you just listen to that, the axe forgets and the tree remembers. I swear to you, you can apply that to any situation. We have students of history on this podcast. We have people who have studied it, who teach it. I mean, it's a universal sentiment, and just one of the examples why this show really cuts a different lane than your traditional Star Wars mythology shows, for the best in terms of the voice that it's trying to have. And there are other just fantastic little bits of character. Again, you only get these little darts, but boy, they tell you a lot about the person. Think of Cyril Karn and the most uncomfortable breakfast you could ever have with a relative, his mother, who sits there and berates him on everything from his posture to his job prospects, all in the guise of, I care about you, son, but in reality taking out probably a lifetime of frustrations, bitterness, and disappointments on her own offspring. I love the line where she tells him, to quit slouching. She says, by sitting like that, you're sending a message to everybody, and I quote, "I promise to disappoint you." It's just a fantastic put down. And you can see that Cyril can give as good as he can get. I mean, he obviously still, loves his family, but boy, he's tired of being the punching bag. And like I say, that entire relationship has been built in just 2 or 3 minutes of screen time. And yet you feel like, you know the backstory, and you can predict how they will react in certain situations. And again, like I say, a credit to taking the time and the trouble to develop your characters and not just rely on a blaster fight, a lightsaber duel, a highly choreographed special effects space battle. They have their place, and they deserve their part in this storytelling. But this is something different. This is something unusual. This is the second episode where literally there is no violence, right? There's no fisticuffs. Someone pulls a knife. Skeen pulls a knife on Andor in a tense moment 2/3 of the way through. But, when you think of Star Wars shows that we've enjoyed, The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Book of Boba Fett and so forth, there's always something going on, right? There's Tusken Raiders that you're fighting, or there's, space pirates, or, Moff Gideon.
Kingdoms and robots.
Right. I mean, so there's all sorts of appropriate, Ahsoka. There's all sorts of appropriate trappings for that type of story.
I'm fine with that one.
And this one, like I say, they don't care if you have to sit there and listen to what they're talking about and pay attention to motivation and characterization, and that's refreshing. It's basically a grown-up show asking you to respond to it and enjoy it and appreciate it on its terms, and not trying to, well, we have to shoehorn our way in, in Star Wars, so there should be a lightsaber battle, or there should be a big climactic ship attack or so forth. And again, I'm not saying we won't see any of that down the road, but what I'm saying is it doesn't need it to be successful. It gets by with just fresh, great dialogue that not only advances the plot, but advances character. Andor tells the group, I know what I'm against. Everything else will have to wait. And that tells you right where his mindset is here. We've seen him start off as kind of a conniving, shifty, dodgy character. Now at least he's willing to say, even if it's for the money, I'll stand on this side of the fence and fight on your side. But don't get me wrong, I'm in it for the money.
Yeah, but he makes a pivot though, right? Because when he pivots and says, this is why I'm here. Like, I'm just going to tell you the truth.
Right.
Right? He could have tried to have made up a side story again, so we're seeing the character pivot and develop at the same time, and he makes himself vulnerable. Think of, there's actually the couple things you brought up that the writing's so good, you can imagine what's happened before. We know that he's connived his way through life, making up stories here and there, and very believable, by the way, right? Maybe even to the point that he believes some of it. Like, that's how good some liars are.
Sure.
And here, maybe for one of the first times, besides, loving his pseudo-mother in a sense, but even then, he probably gave her a line of baloney here and there to either make her happy, satisfy her, get something that he wanted. But here, maybe for one of the first times since he was on that planet with his sister, he's honest.
Yeah.
He kind of throws it out there. Hey, this is this is where we're at, and maybe even sees the value in being truthful, because what does it get him? It gets him acceptance. It gets him a level of respect without having to BS his way around it.
Right.
And I think that's an important point. And going back to what you're talking about too, with Cyril, and is that his mother or his aunt? I thought it was.
It's his mother, Edie.
Yeah. But just that scene at the table, you're going to tell me that you can't see them when he was a teenager or when he was a little kid and she was pulling the same stuff, probably pouring the same milk into the same cereal, the way he's looking at the cereal, like, this is my life. This is how it's been for 25 or 30 years. And this lady just keeps browbeating me every turn every morning. It never stops, which is why I want to be successful so I can get away from her. I mean,
right. And for a time
we
I
see that a
was,
lot.
and now I have to hang my head in shame and like, yeah,
He had to go back, where
Right.
he probably worked so hard to get away. That was probably part of his motivation. I got to get away from this lady, like, drive me nuts, right?
Right.
He gets away, and then he's got to bite the bullet and come back again and sit at probably that same table,
Right.
and he's reliving his youth all over again. And I think that's another key point, too, because we know that's going to be his motivation, but we'll get to that. And the one more thing I want to talk about, because you brought it up, and I probably should have just jumped in as you were talking, but
that's fine.
I know you had a flow going, and I didn't want to interrupt you. But the idea of the tree remembers, right? I think if you look at a lot of big empires that have tried to spread out, and they just think they can chop their way through a city or through people or through armies and just leave that devastation and keep moving forward, and those people are going to be under their thumb because they were defeated, all it does is it brews rebellion, it brews revolt, it brews revenge. And that's some of your classic revolutionary things that happen, because someone goes through and it's like, and I tell my students this all the time, it's very, and I've said this before, it's easy to conquer, it's extremely tough to hold, because eventually those people are going to rise up against you. Even if they wanted you there in the first place, they eventually want you to leave so they can just live their lives again, and all it's going to do is just brew rebellion, and you're going to get overconfident and you're going to lose. And it's what we see. But then we see as we flash forward in those movies that you're wearing one of those shirts, we see it again. I'm so sorry that you're wearing that, but we see, like, that's the cycle we talk about. So I couldn't help myself. I've also had a cup of coffee at 8:35 at night. But those are such important points because, like you said, we don't need a lightsaber battle or the Millennium Falcon ripping apart a bunch of TIE fighters or going against 3 Star Destroyers and somehow making it to be pumped up about this series. We can just do it off of dialogue. And like we've always said before too, right? It's got to be great writing because it's such a short series. And to Master's points, you don't waste a word. You can't. And in this series, they do such a great job of it. You can, like I said, it's like you can see in the past with these characters, which makes the moments even more powerful. Urza Master, I'm going to sip my last cup of coffee and let you go, bro.
Whoa! There you go. And if this were a 3-tier cake of a Graying Jedi episode, we have gone from, shall we say, the base level to the middle analysis. And let me take it to the Yoda level analysis here. Because to go beyond the vessel of the episode that puts the characters in place to the reference and antecedents of the episode to the meta-analysis, this chapter arc is all about trauma. The whole show is about radicalization. This is about trauma. Trauma is one of the methods to which a radical is born. And we're seeing it in multiple facets. Lest we forget, we also see Mon Mothma and her teenage daughter.
Oh.
Trauma on both sides, right? It's the victimized teenage daughter going through normal teenage stuff with the parents, but the trauma that the parents experience and trying to safeguard their future, doing these underhanded things, knowing that if the Empire continues, this little girl might not have a future and she doesn't even know it. I can't even tell her about it. It's absolute torture. No different than any other parent with their child, right? Total opposite of that we have with Cyril. Definitely abused child, mentally, verbally, maybe even physically you could extend, who is now driven to be this absolute company man, toe the line, totally rigid, absolute model, employee type, because he's afraid to fail. He's afraid to end up in the spot he's at, and that's why he ends up there, is he will not sort of buy into reality. He's trying to be the absolute pinnacle of everything so that he never has to go back to his trauma and deal with it. And that's just avoidance, right? And then he's also projecting on those around him. We see that in the first chapter. He's moving towards radicalization, towards evil, empire, or towards good, the rebellion. Likewise, we've got Luthen in this episode very, very briefly. he's dealing with his own trauma of just the waiting being the hardest part, and how he's had to be reckless to try and make something happen, and he's a very calculated individual. And this is something he's prepping for trauma. It's almost the anticipation of trauma, of being that radical who's on the inside but trying to dismantle something, sort of like Mon Mothma, but in a completely different perspective, right? The sort of merchant class perspective, maybe the white collar below the political class. It's a marvelous, marvelous way of looking at every class of the rebellion, every ascent to radicalization here. And it would not be Star Wars, and it would not be a Graying Jedi episode if I didn't name drop Joseph Campbell here, because this is absolutely Campbell-esque storytelling. You are taking archetypes and heroes' journeys, or in this case, possibly villains' journeys, and you're giving, instead of the romantic, long night of the soul, you're giving the reverse of that, right? It's the descent into chaos, and you're not going to get the ascent. This is all going to arrive at the place that leads us to really the beginning of the rebellion. Remember, Rogue One is kind of the pinnacle of the rebellion's actions, so we know this series ends short of that somewhere. As a first-time viewer, I don't know where it's going yet. So it's got me hook, line, and sinker for this reason. It's not just the economy of words, but the economy of every shot. Every single, if we were on film, it'd be, every cell has meaning, it has depth. We learn a lot about our Imperial betrayer, in his element. He fell in love with a local girl.
Right.
And of course, like happens in these conquistador empires, it all goes to shit. I mean, to put it succinctly, because economy of words, we're only so long of a show ourselves, but that's what moves him towards becoming a radical. Even though he's very effective at what he does, he commands respect, he functions within the empire well, he knows and has experienced firsthand the axe cutting the tree.
Yeah.
The tree itself is not destroyed. The tree remembers. So it's an apt metaphor on every single level of analysis you can apply to the show, and that is the creme de la creme of writing. That is the Shakespeare of writing for television series. And hats off, because I just read an article today talking about Ahsoka's viewership for the finale, and how Andor was a bad viewership for the finale, and how people didn't care for either show as much as Disney wanted. I don't know what viewers are really looking for. I'm not going to speak for everybody. Maybe you love the show, maybe you felt okay about it, maybe you didn't like it, but I think there's a level of appreciation that comes to viewing a series and then actually thinking about it, right? If we're viewing this for enjoyment, this is slower paced. This is not and even the original Star Wars isn't like this fast-paced sort of instant gratification type movie we get these days, even if you go to the prequels. Maybe the sequel trilogy is a little more fast-paced and action-packed, but I think that's its weak point, if I'm being honest. But even those, they don't have quite the bam-bam payoff that people are looking for these days, and that's why I think, by and large, ratings tend to be lower, because, you get in every act of a Law & Order episode, you get some big, cataclysmic flashpoint. This climax of storytelling, and it's just punch you with every angle. You don't need that to tell a good story, but you do have to put on your critical thinking cap as a viewer. And I think for the casual fan, no hate on them, I'm not judging, but I think that's where some of these series kind of lose their Nielsen rating edge. It's because people don't view them through the lens of, they're not reading Charles Dickens, they're looking to be entertained by some space battles. And that's valid, that's fair, but dig a little deeper. That's what the Graying Jedi are here for.
You stole it, because that's what I was going to say. That's what we're here for, and that's why we just gained 5 subs so far during our podcast here.
Yay!
And by the way, below, please tell us your comments. Like Urza Master of Urzas brings up excellent points about, Did you like Ahsoka? And we're big advocates of the Solo movie. Like, I thought that movie was great.
Fantastic.
What else did you
Great.
want from that? If there are other things you wanted, let us know. If you agree with us, let us know. Leave some of those comments below so we can continue to, get the word out there and address those things. But I think you're right. Here's my, as an old graying Jedi, my advice to you youngins is sometimes too much of a good thing is just that. It's too much. And if it almost oversaturates it and waters it down. And I think when you get a series like this, which gives you it, and we've talked about this before, it gives you the background stuff. As all the battles are happening here, there's something going on here or something that set that up. And to be able to have great writing that you can appreciate that sets these things up, I mean, to me that's what necessitates that word.
There you go.
Viewership.
There you go. All right, some other things that occurred to me during this episode, because again, we cover a lot of ground. We maybe are not spending a lot of time with Luthen or Dedra over in the Imperial Security Bureau and so forth, but we touch on all the major storylines that we're currently following. We even sneak back to Ferrix, which is now completely under Imperial control. They're taking over the downtown hotel as their headquarters, and that guy that has been squabbling with Dedra over control over the system is sitting there saying, well, hurry this up, I need to get back, et cetera, et cetera. And you spend time with Dedra and her assistant, and again, some great lines in there as they're trying to analyze what does the theft of the Star Path mean. And Dedra says, I know this is rebel activity, even though on the surface they're completely unrelated, from Kessel to Jakku. Good name drops there. During the briefing that she has with her assistant, she says, if it were me, if I was leading this, you never climb the same fence twice. And her assistant chimes in with, it looks too random to be random. And I mean, that's just great. I mean, like I say, we're rooting for Imperials to crack the code, and then you remind yourself, wait a minute, those are Imperials. I don't want them to figure this out, but they have the innate intelligence. They're not just stormtroopers missing, the side of a barn with a blaster. Yes, these people are actually, they have a layering and depth to them, even if they're on the other team.
And I love that scene too, because the guy's like, do you want to use this hotel as the headquarters, right? And the guy's like, he's kind of thinking about it. He goes, make a decision because I have a meeting and I've got to report about it, basically. And it's like, it's so
and the guy
corporate.
Yeah, and the guy that's
so I can go and report about it.
That's going to get left behind. The guy that's going to be in charge in Ferrix. He's like, well, I'll take the assignment, but do I get a title? Like he's like scheming. Like,
right, I don't care about the pay.
Right, but yeah. Can I get the title? And I mean,
right.
It's just little details like that, right? Where you would have that same conversation at Lowe's if it's like, do you want to be
the assistant manager?
Right,
Well, and again, making the classic mistake of you're going to set up your headquarters because you're underestimating, which I always tell my players, it's a mistake to underestimating your enemy by putting your headquarters smack dab in the middle of their city. You're surrounding yourself with insurgents, but they don't so we're the Empire. It doesn't matter. Like, we can put ourselves wherever. And well, we'll see what happens with that, but classic mistake, which I love this I love this series.
I love Ursa Master picking up on Lieutenant Gorn, the Imperial turncoat, who is again the reason that they're going to be able to hopefully penetrate this fortress / dam.
Oh my!
As you say, you see him throughout. Giving his troops the pep talks. Well, why is this not cleaned up? It better be done in an hour. And then he goes down and we get a glimpse of the payroll they're going to steal and the ship they're going to have to use to lift it out. And the best thing about that scene, it's not about conquering the galaxy. It's not about bringing the Jedi to heel. These guys, they want to get the holiday off the next night. Like they're more worried about the work schedule, right? And he's like, Gruff, I wanted that thing painted a week ago. We have a visitor from Coruscant coming in here. Maybe I should, make you work, double time. And they're like, please, sir, please, we never get to see this celestial event. It's the only reason to be on this backwater planet. And he relents because he needs them out of there so that they can pull off the heist in the next episode. But I just love, like I say, when we think of the Imperials, we think of Grand Moff Tarkin, and we think of Grand Admiral Thrawn.
You're far too trusting.
Right. We think about all the guys at the top, but here are guys that are, I wouldn't even call them mid-level functionaries. They're just guys that have to punch in and punch out. And like I say, they're more concerned about, hey, do we get the time off, or do we? It's
Captain Shaw's,
It's a beautiful thing there. I love Skeen's line when he outs Andor as a mercenary who brings a treasure to a robbery. And as we said, Andor taking a chance by actually telling the truth when it was Luthen who stirred the pot by creating this complicated backstory and inserting him into this heist at the last minute. Luther, who lives and breathes the world of espionage and spycraft, and Andor just basically saying, all right, here are my cards. This is what I'm telling you, without still telling them everything, but just enough to, get them to do that. And you contrast that with Nemec, right? So you have Skeen, who appears to be suspicious of everyone and has very personal reasons for joining the rebellion. And you have Nemec, the young idealist, who's writing a manifesto and he speaks about, oppression and things that Ursa Master and Lord Uther have brought up in their studies. What fuels rebellions and what fuels resistance. You see, and then Andor kind of falls right in the middle, right? He's not as jaded as Skeen. I guess I would put Skeen as the sort of the Han Solo, I don't care about anything, I'm just out in it for me, versus Nemec, who wants to liberate the galaxy and have enlightened minds. Just read my words, I've written it all down. This explains everything. This is how, society can move forward. And like I say, Andor's neither too wide-eyed nor too jaded, and right now he's kind of finding his own way on this spectrum. I love Nemec's line about, it's easy to hide behind 40 atrocities rather than a single incident. The Empire, they just consistently, you become numbed to the violence and the degradation and so forth. And when the scary TIE fighter, they did it again. They made a TIE fighter scary just by with sound effects and buzzing them. He says a surprise from above is never as shocking as one from below. Again, you can come in with X-Wings and try and strafe the dam and engage, or you can sneak in through the sewers and the gutters and take them out at the knees. And I thought that was great. And on to one more thing on Lieutenant Gorn. We were talking again, Lord Ursa Master brought this up about he loved a local girl and it went south. The casual racism of the Empire. You remember that the Empire doesn't have other species. There's no, as much as the galaxy, and we've seen everything from Mon Calamari to Rhodians to all sorts of, the Hutts. The Empire is all humans.
Human.
Right? They have different races within the Empire and so forth, but it's all human. It's all 2 legs and 2 arms and so forth. And that's, xenophobic and so forth. And when Gorn is standing there, again, berating a guy who's taking a break, an unauthorized little break there, cigarette break, the guy just says, you think we'll get a lot of locals for the festival? And Gorn, says, well, last year they only had a few hundred. And he's like, well, good, because the smell of them. And you can feel the sting that Gorn, he has to keep it, maintain his face and so forth. But it's he feels that. And this is the organization that he's devoted his career to and so forth. And that took conceivably the love of his life. And this is, as he says, why I became a radical, why I'm facing trauma. It just, like I say, it's a throwaway moment, but it's not, because it illuminates so much about who these people are and why they're doing what they're doing. And the rebellion, everyone's doing it for a different reason, right? Andor's doing it because he had to get off of Ferrex and he's been promised money. Skeen is doing it because they killed his brother and stole his farm. Nemec is doing it because he truly believes that this is the wrong way to run a galaxy and a people, and that the system will destroy itself. I mean, Luthen is, and Mon Mothma, they all seem to have their own motivations. And what will be telling, that this first season is 5 years before Rogue One. So this entire season will be 1 year. Season 2, which we will see probably next year sometime, that will cover the remaining 4 years leading up to Rogue One. But the rebellion has to unify, right? They have to come under the umbrella and say, look, it doesn't matter why we're doing this. We're here against a common foe, and we have to unite to fight this foe. Right now, it's just all these little scattered pieces that, it's like herding cats. Luthen has to try to keep them all together, to accomplish the mission, to pull off the heist, to steal the payroll. But it's difficult because you have everything pulling and pushing in different directions. And again, just marvelous stuff. If you haven't figured out what color my lightsaber is going to be this evening, then you're not watching enough Graying Jedi, is all I can say. So,
which is why you should subscribe and share out
yes.
Graying Jedi, the Warp Core podcast, Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear, which will be cutting an episode this weekend. And Pending Rebrand. Hey.
And more and more and more and more and more and more content coming at you live and recorded.
Ooh.
Yes.
So hit that subscribe button, hit that notification button, drop us a comment. What did you think? What color is your lightsaber? Red, blue, or green? Without further ado, I turn it over to Silly and Maz because I think we know what his answer is, but he tells it so beautifully. So what lightsaber, kyber crystal, are you using?
We're going Barnes & Noble gift card green, Lord Ursa Master. Oh, sorry. Like I said, a lesser show would have taken the same information and presented it in a more pedestrian, routine, predictable manner. And so what I think elevates this from just a standard Blue episode is, like, when this credits started to roll, I couldn't wait. I mean, I had to wait when it was first streaming, but I couldn't wait to find out.
Right.
Well, that I know the heist is coming. Like, you literally are on the edge of your seat because you know the next episode, good or bad, stuff's going down. And like I say, when you can take your audience investment in characters like that and prime them to be like, oh, this is, Graying Jedi fans, you won't want to miss next week is all I can say when we cover episode 6, because like I say, the payoffs in this show are terrific, but they earn it. It's not just randomly like, oh, okay, here's an action scene for you. You've earned every beat, every storyline, every emotional pull. And like I say, we just met these people. We've only had them for 2 episodes. Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which we cover on the Warp Core, they've had 2 seasons worth of goodwill to give us depth of characters of Captain Pike and Spock and Erica Ortega and everyone. But they've had, 22 episodes to sort of build that thing. Like I say, I already feel like I've spent an entire season with this heist crew, and some of them I may have to say goodbye to in the very next episode based on how the show is constructed. So I just think this is an economy of storytelling that you don't get everywhere, and maybe it wouldn't work in the Paramount Plus reboot of Frasier. But for this show and for the Star Wars name, it's doing it proud.
I'll go next because I want to. I'm going to go Kevin McHale,
Nice.
Boston Celtics, green.
I
mean, how can I not? One of the guys with the greatest footwork ever, one of the best post players of all time, and just Celtic green is good for anybody, which, by the way, Jedi Cillian Masimas, one Christmas from his father, I got a Kevin McHale Celtics jersey that, due to my musculature now, I can't fit into anymore. But man, back in the day,
Sure.
I rocked that baby so much. I wore that thing so much that the lettering and the numbers actually started to come off of it.
Oh dear.
Now, I would just stretch it out with my musculature. All right, Urza Master,
Nice.
Master Urza's.
Well, I'm looking around for some sort of visual aid, and I'm not finding much, but because Urza Master focuses on ye old technology, I'm going to go with Western Digital Caviar 22100 PCB green.
Nice.
Yes, Gary.
This here is a wonderful 2111.8 megabyte hard drive for a system I've got sitting next to me that you'll see on my channel coming soon. Head on over to Urza Master, hit that subscribe button if you don't mind. I mean, what more can we really say? I think from a person who spent many years reading big leather-bound books and many JSTOR articles about those leather-bound books or about the people who talked about those leather-bound books, and absolutely burnt my brains out on analysis and every other literary dissection you can think of, vivisection, if you will. This titillated every bit of my senses. I love dialogue. I love intrigue. I love storytelling in this manner. And to the Philip Roths out there, this is how you tell the same stories in a new way. You find ways to make those same stories interesting. You find new characters within those stories. This is Grendel to Beowulf, in a way. It's very cerebral. It's very much introspective. It's very psychological. And all of that is wonderful. I mean, this is a postmodern Star Wars story right here that comes at you from a very romantic lens and is very digestible. So if you have not spent your life whittling away at an English degree as I have, I highly recommend Andor, and this episode in particular, despite being a vehicle in between chapter kickoff to chapter wrap-up. This is the exposition part of that bell curve of storytelling that usually is your throwaway. You don't remember a lot of it because it's not that exciting. It doesn't denouement out and give you some sort of conclusion or message. But this is the meat and potatoes that gets you there. For the first time in many iterations of shows, I actually feel like this might be the most valuable component of this story arc. And it doesn't take a whole season to get you from point A to point B. It doesn't take a bunch of Monster of the Week episodes to sort of goad you into watching for one scene with the smoking man. Like, this is economy of storytelling for the ADHD brain viewer that needs these bits and chunks that are aimed very specifically at what it needs to tell you to build what feels like a season's worth of relationship in one episode with motley crew, sans Vince Neil. It's wonderful. Honestly, if there was a double-edged green lightsaber a la our friend Darth Maul, maybe a Lord Maul version of Darth Maul, Jedi Master Maul, if that were such a thing, I would probably venture that far, because this was visually beautiful. I mean, I don't think we didn't even talk about how visually beautiful this is, and that, again, that pastoral against the machination of the Empire. We haven't even gotten to that. You could dissect the hell out of this. For any of you English majors out there who need to write some sort of a creative paper, this episode of Andor is your key to that bachelor's degree. With that, I am Urza Master. With us, as always, was Lord Uther and Jedi Master Cilia Maz. I thank the Jedi Council for this evening's 11th episode of The Graying Jedi. Once again, if you have not subscribed to Pending Rebrand, join us again next week by hitting that subscribe button. We're free. It doesn't cost you anything to hit subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything to hit like. It certainly helps us out. Drop us a comment. Maybe you just don't want to say anything about Andor at all and you just want to be like, I like turtles. Guess what? We like turtles too. They were in that Ahsoka show or something sort of like a turtle.
Yes.
Live long and prosper is not what I do here, guys. So for that, I'll just say, may the Force be with you.
And also with you.
video games?
You have failed. The same way, I will destroy you.
Then my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am Jedi Master Urza Master. With me as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Cillian Maz. Welcome.
Hello there.
And welcome to everyone in the audience. Here, abroad, and in a galaxy far, far away. Today we're discussing episodes 2 and 3 of Andor, and I am jazzed. I have to say, I'm really excited to talk about these 2 episodes for a number of reasons. And I have to say, it's something that we keep bringing up, but if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to Pending Rebrand, because we're talking Andor, and we're going to be talking more Star Wars to come, even as Star Wars is on a little bit of a back order due to the ongoing strikes. But fear not, my friends. There's plenty of Star Wars to talk. Even if we got to start going to comic books and books, we will never run out of Star Wars material. But for background today, on today's episodes 2 and 3 of Andor, I turn it over to Jedi Master Cillian Maz.
Thank you, Master, and thank you, Master Uther. And thanks to everyone that is watching and enjoying us, whether in the States, overseas, or again, far beyond the reaches of our known universe. So, Andor you have to think of in groups of 3, and with one major exception that we will get to later in the cycle. The show was designed to be told in small bite-sized story arcs, usually lasting 3 episodes. So the first episode, which we spoke of in our previous adventure, and the 2 we're going to be discussing tonight were all conceived of as a singular story arc, meaning the next time we meet, we'll be on a completely different trajectory. Many of the same faces, but in new places with new excitement and new danger to follow, and you'll pick it up as we go. So for the first 3 episodes of Andor, to kick it all off, they were all directed by the same director, Toby Haynes. Haynes is a British science fiction and genre director. He's worked on the Benedict Cumberbatch updating of Sherlock. He's worked on the modern Doctor Who. He's worked on Being Human, if you're a BBC science fiction fan, and Black Mirror on Netflix, or it's now available on Netflix, Black Mirror, which for any science fiction fans who are enjoying our commentary on Star Wars and Star Trek, I would recommend checking out Black Mirror. It is a updated sort of Twilight Zone exploration of mankind and technology, and it goes to some very dark, humorous, and interesting places. So if you've always wanted to try it, I would say jump right in and check a couple out, because they definitely are worth your marker. And Haynes directed the famous USS Callister episode of Black Mirror, which was, in its own way, a spot-on parody homage to Star Trek, but done, again, with a very subversive slant. So Emmy-nominated episode, USS Callister of Black Mirror, Haynes was responsible. Tony Gilroy, the showrunner, was the writer for these first 3 episodes. He continues in that role in episodes 2 and 3, and we talked about his extensive credits, how he brought the Bourne franchise to life, but filled it with more than just great martial arts action, but real gritty espionage and spycraft and so forth. I also wanted to bring up the composer for Andor. His name is Nicholas Britell. He's a New Yorker. He's done a lot with Adam McKay, who was Will Ferrell's writing and producing partner for many years. Bertel, our composer for Andor, has worked on The Big Short, Vice, the Netflix film all-star cast Don't Look Up. He was the principal composer for HBO's Succession, if you enjoyed that backstabbing drama. And he also worked on Academy Award winner Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk. Moonlight, you will remember, is the film that was not read as Best Picture when Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway gummed that up. It actually should have been the one announced, and they instead gave it to La La Land and created much drama before Will Smith took it upon himself to top that with the slap heard around the world. But I digress. Nicholas Bertel is our composer, and I was mentioning to Master Urza Master before the show, next time you put on an Andor, don't skip the credits, the opening sequence. Don't skip right to the good stuff, friends. Listen to the opening title music, because Bertel, whether he was being a little cheeky or whether he was being very experimental, he's taken the same melody, the same title theme that he's created for this show, and in each of the 12 episodes, he composes it and plays it with different instruments in different settings. So, for example, in episode 2, you hear Andor, and you hear it with heavy strings, violins, cellos, and so forth. In episode 3, which we'll talk about tonight, you hear the exact same theme, but with heavy synthesizer, no strings. But it's the same music. And when we talk about further episodes, you'll hear it again portrayed in a different light. And I don't know if that's never been done in Hollywood before, but it isn't done often. Everyone wants to get a repetitive, catchy theme, or theme song. Think Cheers and Friends. But this is fun. If you know what you're listening for, listen to the opening of Andor through each episode, and you will hear again. You'll recognize the melody, but it won't be presented quite the way you were expecting. So, and like a good book that unfolds chapter to chapter, we have our characters from the first episode that return, portrayed by Diego Luna and Kyle Soler and Adria Orjana. But we've added some new faces to these episodes, building the wall one brick at a time. Fiona Shaw joins us as Marva. You've known her primarily as Aunt Petunia in the Harry Potter franchise. She also had an extended role in HBO's True Blood for a spell during the mid-seasons. Fiona Shaw brings a great gravity, and we learn in these episodes how she and Cassian intersected. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And of course, you have the magnificent Stellan Skarsgård, who the first time we see him on camera just instantly captures your gaze, and you don't want to take it off because he has got an iron-piercing stare and such gravitas and chemistry, and he's earned that over a career spanning decades. You've enjoyed him in Good Will Hunting, Ronin, Steven Spielberg's Amistad, Rennie Harlin's Deep Blue Sea. That's the giant sharks eat Sam Jackson picture. He's been in Angels and Demons with Tom Hanks. He's been in Pirates of the Caribbean in at least 2 of the sequels. He's been in Mamma Mia, showing off his song and dance. And take it from me, he's a better hoofer than Pierce Brosnan. He was in the remake of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. He played the corpulent Baron Harkonnen in the latest remake of Dune, and will continue to appear in that franchise. And of course, he's done his Marvel work in Thor as Professor Selvig, studying the Tesseract. So you love him, you know him, and boy, does he make an impression in this show. So what are these 2 episodes about? Well, we're further going to explore Cassian, who's kind of a heel, who's kind of basically even though you feel some empathy or compassion towards your fellow mankind, you don't want to slip this guy any Imperial credits because it's not going to drugs or ill-gotten gains, but he's very shifty when we first meet him. Far from the stalwart Rebel Alliance commander we will know in Rogue One, and so forth. So we see Cassian here basically desperate He knows the authorities are pursuing him for killing the officers on the corporate world in episode 1. And he's got a bit of Imperial merchandise, a navigation device that the Imperials use, factory fresh. Seals are still on it. And he knows that to the right black market buyer, that's his ticket off of Ferrix. But it doesn't matter who he takes advantage of or who he owes money to, he's going to try to get it. And we see that in his relationship, in his interaction with Marva, when we first meet them, when he tries to BS her. And of course, she's already heard that there's a warrant out for his arrest, thanks to their lovable droid B2EMO. And you know, he doesn't even flinch when she calls him out on his lies and his BS. He just rolls with it and keeps running roughshod kind of over her. And you get the sense they've had conversations like this before, maybe not with the stakes so high. But that leads me to the first thing I want to talk about, and this actually will span the second and the third episode. You have to kind of think of these two as kind of really one long 90-minute episode. It just makes more sense dramatically, and it's sort of easier to bring all this into the discussion, especially since it was directed and written by the same team. But we get to see how Marva and Cassian, aka Casa, first met. And those go to the flashbacks back on Kenari, when Casa and his tribe set out and found a separatist freighter that had crashed on their home world. And the crew wasn't quite dead and ended up trying to fight. And we see the Kenarians using just simple blowpipes and primitive weapons. They're not walking around with lightsabers and blasters, but they subdue the enemy and they take their wounded away. But Casa stays behind and explores this downed ship, and even it appears gets a first glimpse of what he looks like. Apparently reflective surfaces are not part of the Kenarian tradition, and it kind of freaks him out. And into this come a couple of scavengers, smugglers, Marva, her husband Clem, and a revitalized, much younger B2 EMO. And Marva, knowing that the rebellion or the Imperials or the Republic, I guess in this era, are going to be arriving to check out this downed freighter, she makes a bold move and she basically kidnaps Casa. They don't understand each other. They can't communicate with each other. But she makes a decision that she's saving him, and spirits him away in her starship. And we see them actually leaving planet. And this would then begin sort of an adoptive relationship where she would basically take him into her home and raise him as her own. But I got to ask you guys, unlike, say, Kyle ending up in a Kansas cornfield in the DC universe, for example, it's kind of ambivalent. Did she do him a favor by separating him from his tribe, by leaving those other children with, I mean, they didn't know about them per se, but without doing any due diligence or anything, did they basically sentence those kids to death, including his own sister, whom we've seen that he's looking for when the series begins? Is this something that may have made him into kind of the shifty, not to be trusted person that we see, as we're introduced to him? Like, I'm just curious how you feel about it, because I think the standard fantasy approach is, well, thank God that the white savior was there to liberate him. But I feel like the storytelling and Tony Gilroy, I think he kind of wants you to maybe stop for a second and say, I don't know how comfortable I am with how it all shook out. I mean, so I throw it out to you as sort of a philosophical moral grounding, which Star Wars does not like to play with, don't forget. They are all about myth building and mythology, but this one kind of says, wait a minute, what do you think about that?
I mean, it's tough, right? I thought, I thought this would be a lot easier if this was an Imperial thing that they were saving him from. But you do kind of realize, like, was he really in as much danger as they kind of painted it out to be, or was this just a scared kid that they didn't really know what to do with, but they didn't want to leave any witnesses behind?
See, there's that, yeah.
There's a little bit of that, but I think at the same time, like, especially the characterization, I go back to the acting. There was definitely love there. Like, that's what came through the acting for me later in life, between the two. There was some protective nature, but there was also some, like, genuine caring for this kid. Like, you know, hey, like, he's scared and uncivilized. Let's rescue him, kind of thing.
Rescue, right.
I think rescue's to be taken lightly, but at the same time, it's kind of, I think there was good intent. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of one of those gray areas that, well, as a graying Jedi, I think it's interesting to see painted out in a way that it's sympathetic, but it's also kind of, you know, through a modern lens, you're kind of like, is this as pure of heart as it is supposed to come across, or is this kind of that, like you said, white savior thing? That they're trying to flip on its head a little bit. And it does. It provokes you to think, which I think is fantastically done. That's great writing. It's something that I don't think Star Wars really does all that well in its other versions that we've seen and we'll talk about in the future. Especially some of the adoptive type parent things, you know, the Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru situation. It's like, well, clearly they cared for him, but were they really just stifling him? Were they really just, you know, forcing their own idiom on something they really didn't deserve?
Understand, or, yeah.
You know, or understand. And it's very cool.
I'm just glad that they asked them, they kind of raised the question, I guess. I mean, you know, I've taken in stray cats before and fed them and all of that, and that comes too from good intention and a good place. But I don't know. The more times I've re-seen this now a few times, the more times I kind of think like, man, it's just, they just didn't hesitate. I mean, she didn't. Her husband, Clem, was not a fan of the move, but she's just like, he's coming with us. And it's just, it almost reads as almost a kidnapping in one light. I mean, as opposed to like, oh, you know, there's Imperial stormtroopers on that ridge. We've got to get you out of here. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's bold. It's really interesting that they would pose this question. But, you know, it's something I have to say, I think we've all probably thought these questions about the greater, you know, unseen portion of the galaxy. You know, like, we always talk about the Skywalkers and the hoity-toity sort of Jedi, but and the down and dirty Sith, but there's a whole lot of other stuff going on in this galaxy, and those are the compelling stories that, frankly, I'm for. Let's hear it. Let's hear the real world problems that they're dealing with, and they don't necessarily need to solve them. That's the thing. It's like just posing that in the situation and being like, well, you know, again, it's shades of gray. Bing.
Bing.
I like it.
Yeah, from our perspective, it might not look right, but from her perspective, I kind of think it does, because he's in there smashing stuff up. I guess he kind of seems uncivilized, and what's civilized, that's a whole discussion that could take up probably 30 podcasts about what civilization, you know, really is, or what we consider civilized and not civilized. But, you know, I thought that, were they wearing masks when they first went in there?
Right.
Were they
There
masked
was
up?
some sort of gas
So,
leak.
yeah, so I mean, you know, my gut says it's the right move. Going on, if I was to see it from their perspective, and I can see why her husband is obviously not really thrilled or feeling good about this idea of it happening. Plus, I think when you put the spin on it like you did, because it's, you know, it's the rebellion or the Republic, and it's not the Empire, does it make it even worse? So it would have been better if it was the Empire, right? It would have been like, oh, okay, she's going to save him from the Empire.
Well, you said
this is okay.
You said something provocative there. That's interesting.
Of course I did, because that's what I do.
Because that's what you do. You talked about civilization and the assumption. Again, like I said, this is all subtext. You have to cleave a little deeper to find it. But I think what Tony Gilroy is suggesting is they just assume that this sort of wild child that they can't understand is somehow like, the feral kid from the Road Warrior. Like, they haven't seen his encampment, where it appeared by all accounts they were living in relative peace and harmony with each other and had their own system of shelter and presumably, gathering food and leadership. And I mean, it's just sort of the assumption that he's not civilized, wherein in fact there's a completely different possibility of what civilization on this, this world we later learn was abandoned after mining accidents, and you see the strip mine, that they've just left the world like with a scar. So that's even more interesting to me that you said that, Uther, because like I say, so they just assume like, well, we've got to, like Tarzan, we've got to take him out of the jungle and put him in a suit and teach him how to read. And it's just like, I mean, it kind of echoes sort of that thought process. But I think what the show is trying to do, again, as Master said, not necessarily answer it, but at least make you go, So.
Yeah, I mean, it does that. I mean, and if we talked about Avatar, we could have that whole discuss. I mean, there's a lot, right? With that's just a play on Native American and Native American civilization and Americans. So there's a lot that goes into that. But again, if you're, I think, putting myself in their shoes or her shoes, it probably is the right move. If you've got a mask on because you're afraid of dying from the gases that are in there and things like that, maybe it was the right move. Again, not fully on board with it, but I think I'm a little more on board with it than the two of you are, which understandably so. So here's my question or my point, and this kind of is an Urza Master thing. The droids are just so different in every single episode. I mean, every single series, and B2EMO again has its own personality and one that you just gravitate to.
Yes.
Like you kind of feel sorry for him, but he can be a little bit sly, and he's very protective. He's kind of like, here's what he reminds me of. He reminds me of the old dog that's around the house.
Just gonna say
that you love and understands you and gets you and will do anything for you because it's got unconditional love for you. Like, you can almost feel the love radiating off of B2EMO. But the amazing point that you brought up several times, which now I am completely addicted to and on board with, is every time, besides maybe BB-8, which was obviously an R2-D2 clone that just rolled around instead of having legs and being on wheels, every other, like K2SO, I think I said that name right, from Rogue One.
Rogue One.
How unique was that robot? Or Huang from the last, or from Ahsoka, right? Like, they do this amazing job of creating these very unique droids that you just kind of, you fall in love with, or you appreciate, or you see how they all add something to the story, right? There's never really been a droid where you've been like, we could have done without him. All these droids at one point or another, like, you've needed them to be a part of the story. And I think that's been something great that I see here too.
Even Ursa Master, who said he loved the Kenobi series, which I'm sure we'll get around to discussing on The Graying Jedi, they had the hydraulic lifter droid, which didn't have a line, right? It only communicated non-verbally and so forth, but by the time that droid's fate is revealed, if your heartstrings aren't pulled in terms of what it does for sacrifice, I mean, yes. So, what do you say, Ursa Master? You're a droid guy.
Yeah, I mean, the old dog is spot on. That's exactly from the first glimpse we get of it in the first episode, and especially in these two episodes, you see it when it was younger and more spry. You kind of fall in love with it, and it's great writing, and it's good characterization too, which I think is unique to Star Wars. I don't know, other than, like Data, you don't necessarily get that from a Star Trek or any other sci-fi series where you kind of develop sort of an emotional response to an inanimate object otherwise. And although these are animated objects and, have sort of a AI type life of their own, but it's tremendous, the diversity of creatures and humans, and then you get this diversity of droids throughout this franchise. And hats off, because they are all kind of universally droid-like, and they have sort of interconnected droid living and existence, but they are literally a separate, society of their own. Even though they function within the societies they're in, it's so incredible to see, and they're very interesting, just focal points of personality throughout every scene that they're in, whether it's R2D2, zapping a little bot or something like that. It's always entertaining. And it is what kind of humanizes, oddly enough, some of these stories, because some of them are a little out there, and sometimes it's the droid's function to reel you in and give you that emotional support while you're in that moment.
So here's I gotta ask another question. Too
Go
bad
ahead.
they're silly and Moss. Which series are the droids more important? Star Wars or Star Trek? Just the robot, AI, all of that stuff. Which one is it more important to the plot line, to the overall story?
Yeah, I mean, Star Trek has, Majel Barrett's computer voice that's guided us for generations, so to speak. So I mean, if you count that as
Data, lore,
not
board.
just Data and all that. I mean, Data, lore, and all of them before were all sort of part of a similar family tree. And there's probably, and then we had the androids in What Are Little Girls Made Of, that we just talked about on the Warp Core. If you're following Pending Rebrand and our Star Trek theme series,
Of course they are.
Check that out. But I think Star Wars kind of came and ran with it. I'm not afraid of AI if it looks like Star Wars. Now Skynet and the T-1000, I'm terrified of. And I still lock the doors at night for fear that they'll come looking for me to change history. But George Lucas leaned in 1977 when robots were like Robbie the robot from Lost in Space, or the Metropolis droid that inspired C-3PO's design. Like he made them, as you say, he sort of anthropomorphized them, gave them characteristics that we could recognize, human characteristics. And again, it's like if that old dog on your porch could have a conversation with you, then, he sort of gave them those personalities. So I absolutely give the edge to Star Wars there in terms of just treating it like it's just any part of the universe. It's not new and strange, and people are like, oh my gosh, that droid can talk. It's just, they're used for slave labor. They're used for, martial law. They're a whole part of this universe, this galaxy that's been built out over millennia. And I think that they keep coming up with new and cool ways to sort of do that. And by the way, until we get to the movies, I won't spend too long on it. But I am a big BB-8 fan. So let's just move, ball. So we'll touch on that there. So. There's sort of three more buckets we want to touch on before we go into hyperspace. The first is Cyril Karn, our favorite corporate agent, who feels that investigating this case, if he doesn't give it his all, he's not worth the uniform. And in this case, we see a man who teams up with an equally fanatic sergeant, Sergeant Mosk. God love him and his accent. As they go in pursuit of that renegade outlaw, Cassian Andor. And he gives just about the worst pep talk you'll ever hear outside of like a morning shift meeting at Walmart. I just loved the faces, the bored and resentful faces of the troops that he was allegedly in charge of knowing that they knew a hell of a lot more about what they were supposed to be doing than he ever would. And just the idea of this sort of office Rainn Wilson type, like, suddenly finding himself on the front lines and being woefully unprepared. But that leads me to sort of our second bucket on this. Obviously, the raid to capture Cassian Andor goes horribly awry, and we'll talk about Cassian and Luthen's involvement in that shortly. But as far as from Cyril's point of view, he kind of went behind his superiors. He organized this posse to go and retrieve the villain so he could get the glory and the accolades and the promotion and all of that. And it literally blows up in his face with wounded, dying, dead, and the prize slips away. And it's just the shock, like that wasn't supposed to happen, look on his face, and sort of the anguish of holy bleep, I'm going to be in trouble when I get back to the office, kind of like, I don't know, did you guys, Ursa Master seeing it for the first time and Lord Uther revisiting it, do you start to feel sorry for the little worm? Or is it just like his karmic comeuppance at being that guy in the office that you don't want to have lunch with in the break room? Like, how do you read that in terms of not just the acting performance, but just, again, the characterization of, gee, I don't know if, I kind of feel bad for him.
It's a little bit of both. I have to admit. It's mostly one, but a tiny bit of the other. Most of it is me feeling like I felt like when Grima Wormtongue got thrown out of the keep. Real vindication. It was that righteous comeuppance. But there's a small part of me that sees the look of horror on his face when he realizes he's failed. And not only has he failed just in his own personal mission where he's set this sort of standard for himself that he's holding himself to and failed to meet his own expectations. But now he's getting that oh shit moment where he's like, I'm in trouble. And I've seen this look on people's faces. You see it on little kids a lot, where they kind of realize, uh-oh, and like not like the uh-oh where you can kind of laugh about it and clean up the spilled milk, but the uh-oh where it's like, uh-oh, I'm actually in trouble now. This is not going to be good. And you kind of feel bad. Like, I don't know, it's just an empathy thing, but it's like I do kind of feel bad for the guy because it's like, look, you really were doing what you thought was the right thing, what you absolutely at your core believed to be the right thing. As misguided as that is, I kind of feel bad for you because now you have to go with the realization of how the real world works. And, as much as a jackass a person can be, you kind of got to feel bad for that person because they, in their heart of hearts, had full faith in what they were doing. And it just, in this case, literally blew up in his face. And now that's the fallout, you have to take sometimes.
He is the CO from West Point that lands in Vietnam and tries to start telling the soldiers what to... It's the guy my dad hated when he was in Nam. And like, no, soldier, you can't, you can't put your machine gun on the helicopter like that. My dad's like, then I'm not flying the mission. Because I'm not going to get shot up and go down. Like, you're fresh here, you're green, there's no way it's going to happen. So yeah, he's the guy you love to hate, right? Without a doubt. You're rooting against the guy the whole time. But there's another part that came up that I talk to my students a lot about. And it's the part where the local population start ringing the bells because they're trying to warn each other. And I've told my students several times over the years, and I think it's pretty accurate because I continue to tell them it, but it's very easy to conquer. It's very tough to hold. And the biggest reason why it's tough to hold is the local population is going to get sick of you and rise up against you. So even though this is some dumb local security force, the people know about this, right? Like, because they talk about, like, what are they doing here? Oh, they must be looking for someone because that's when they show up, right? And they've even come up with this intricate system to warn each other about it. So I think this goes back to the same theme that we've talked about over and over and over again, like the cycle continues, right? They can't get it right. We're going to see it again when the Republic takes over again, but that idea that the local population doesn't want him there, we're seeing that in full effect. And we're seeing, and the guy's like, we got to get out. And the reason why he's telling Cyril we got to get out of here is because he knows what's going to happen. Those people are going to come after them next. And then I'm not going to ruin anything down the road, but we continue to kind of see this from that local population. So that's something else to kind of keep in our back pocket as we move along here. Conquering's easy. Holding is extremely tough because that local population's going to get sick of it. Even if they want you there, they're going to get sick of you because they just want to have their own lives, and they're going to get you out one way or another. And you don't want it to be the other way, because that's when you start getting wounded and people die.
And first of all, the citizens of Ferrex, like, they're down to banging things. I want that job of that guy who would sound the nightly tolls and the morning bells. Just go up there and just hit something as hard as you can several times to let people know it's time to leave work or it's time to go to work. So I want that job. Although I don't know if I could bang it hard enough to make the sound there. Okay, real quick, let's touch on Bix and Tim, because everyone knows it's not a great idea to sleep with the boss, especially if your ex is currently got an arrest warrant out for him. This might be the first Star Wars that ever features a booty call. I mentioned that to Master Urza Master before the show started. And, I mean, you can't blame Tim, that's the owner of the junk shop, for falling for her. But, of course, what does he do? He starts drinking a little too much at the cantina, misreads a conversation that she's having with Cassian, which is as far away from romance as you're going to get. And then phones in the anonymous tip, which I will confess in my youth, I think I did that once or twice when people were throwing loud parties. So I'm guilty of that as well,
yes,
sure. But hey, we were young, right? But yes, and then Tim pays for his crimes, such as it is, tries to be a misguided hero and walks right into an ambush from the frightened security forces, who are just compounding their errors once they reach planetside there. And so you have, Bix, who's been roughed up and handcuffed to the adobe wall, and then she watches the guy who basically betrayed Cassian get gunned down in the middle of the street, and then they're like, let's get out of here, just leave his body there. So it's a lot. And once again, it's a great moment because you see how just Cassian, even by not being there, has completely left wreckage in his steed. He's brought law enforcement into their midst. A man who, I don't know if you want to just call him completely innocent, is dead. The woman he probably once, shared a bed with has, been traumatized. Like, his home with Marva, has been ransacked and overturned, and she's sitting in the wreckage. He leaves a trail of destruction in his wake, and it doesn't seem to faze him at this point. Like, he's somewhat oblivious to it because he's only concerned about himself. So thank God he then falls into the orbit of Luthen, who we are meant to surmise is more than just a black market dealer, but in fact might have ties to the rebellion, because he says that one of the best lines of the show, and the show has got great lines, "Don't you want to fight these bastards for real?" Which suggests that there's more going, and he doesn't even care about Cassian's tech. He actually came to see if Cassian was who he thought he was, and if he could be of use to this rebellion. And I think their conversation and their back and forth, before all the action starts to take place, the negotiation, that's classic Tony Gilroy, and it's a marvel to listen to, because Cassian just wants the money and he wants to split, and Luthen is testing him to see how how shallow or how committed he would be. And when he asked Cassian about, how did you get this? I'll give you 1,000 more credits if you tell me. And then he hears in Cassian the passion, like, they don't, you put on a uniform and you act like you belong there. It's like they couldn't dream that a sewer rat like me could get into their house and steal their stuff. Like, and you can hear the rage, building up from a lifetime of oppression and all of that. And that's when Luthen realizes there's something there. There's a spark there that could be ignited. So I want to talk about what will become the central relationship of the show, even if they're not sharing screen time. Luthen, like I say, just sort of steps up and just commands the scene. This is a rebel leader, probably like Forrest Whitaker saw Guerrera, who, spoiler alert, keep your eyes open. This is not a safe. This is a guy who's going to get his hands dirty. It looks like he has. He's always he's telling Cassian, I put bombs on the walls, and I've got you always have to have a plan and like this. And he says, kill him when they get the draw on Cyril. He just doesn't hesitate, kill him. Like, he's ruthless, right? He's ruthless. Even more so than a Han Solo's kind of scoundrel way. I mean, this guy would kill you without even blinking, and he wouldn't think about it 5 minutes after he did it. And I just want to talk briefly about, like I say, the Skarsgård, Diego Luna sort of back and forth there, and the uneasy alliance that they have formed going forward. Because like I say, that's electrifying in its possibilities.
Well, that's the freedom fighter way, right? The rebellions, they may be lofted up as these good people, these holier than thou types, but we see it in basically everything that's come after the original trilogy. And even in the Republic, there were a lot of people who were just sort of out for themselves or profiteers. And they all survived into the Empire and did just fine. And after the Empire, and it's not the rot of society necessarily, but the truth of life. There are people out there who allow their simplistic emotions to drive them. In this case, it's his anger against the Empire. It's how he feels slighted by whatever the Empire has done to him. He's anything Empire, he hates it. It's a bitter division that, that could very well be justified. I mean, the Empire is obviously supposed to be the bad guy here. But, again, we talk shades of gray. Andor is not exactly the nicest guy, even though he may become a hero. The Rebellion, not made up of the nicest people, even though they may have the most glorious, positive intentions in the world, or the galaxy in this case. Likewise with the Empire. They aren't all Sith. They're not all Palpatine. Some of these are hired guns who, simply put, went to the highest amount of credits. And or you've got, people in the ranks who are just like, just play the game, collect your paycheck, and go home. Or they're hardcore, like, I have to do my duty. It's the right thing. Or I have to do my duty because I like killing. That's what it boils down to. And any freedom fighter group is going to have that. You're going to have your absolute radicals who may, in fact, be detrimental to what otherwise may be a very reasonable, legitimate movement. I think we see that play out on the world stage quite frequently in real life. And this is just a magnification of those real life events that, the truth is, nobody's pure. Even Yoda probably has some secrets. And,
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that those with sullied backgrounds might not rise up and become something great, and vice versa.
Is it more upsetting to you two and to viewers who are enjoying The Graying Jedi? Is it more upsetting to consider the Empire as not necessarily evil, that there may have been people just trying to get through the day? Or is it more upsetting to think of the rebellion as not something with high ideals, but willing to get down and do terrorist-like things in order to further their cause? Like, which one is sort of more upsetting as a Star Wars fan to kind of ponder? Like, maybe the Imperials, there were some people there that, weren't all Nazi fascists, or that the rebellion may have had some truly despicable people, but again, on the right side of the argument.
That's the argument of war, right? Armies that slaughter each other, 90% of them don't even want to be there.
Right.
They're doing their duty, or they're doing what they needed to do to feed themselves. And yeah, I mean, I think the most upsetting part about it is that it's harder, I think, to think of the Empire as not completely filled with bad people, because that's what they're lifted up to be in the original trilogy. Like, you want to think of them as universally evil, and I think just experience sake tells us that's obviously could not be the truth. It's just not possible. Because they're made up of people, and people like creatures, of course, but it's also fiction, right? It's a movie. You have to be comfortable somewhat with the fact that, there are bad apples and good apples on both sides always, but predominantly speaking, I think you're usually correct. The rebellion is by and large good, even though there's probably some bad there. And vice versa. The Empire is by and large bad, even though there's probably some good people. And there may have been parts of the Empire which blossomed, elevated societies and were heralded and welcomed. I mean, think of the Sudetenland. I mean, there were definitely people there very welcoming to their invaders, and did very well for a brief period until war ripped them apart. And may have been resentful and fought even more fervently for their side, for the Empire, because they were doing so well. That's why war profiteers encourage war, and that's why some of these warlords we're seeing in these post-Empire stories love the Empire. Why they're like, we need to get the Empire back because they just let us do our thing. The New Republic or the Rebel Alliance, they don't want us out here profiteering off of slave labor or whatever trade, whatever kind of dark underworld we're sowing. They don't want that. They're trying to make a good empire. And the truth be told is, no matter what you do, and we see it we saw it in Ahsoka, the new Republic is just kind of a toddler, really, and all governments in some respect only have so big a scope of control, and it's kind of the classic, do your elected officials really have anything to do with your day-to-day life? Fact of the matter is they don't. 90% of the time, they do not affect your life at all. The 10% can really count. So, that's kind of, if you want to get real abstract here, that's kind of the argument that's being presented is, these microcosm stories are compelling because the question is begged, was the Empire all that bad? Is the New Republic that much better? And those are the stories that I crave, and that's what I find very exciting about this Andor story, is like, you're really getting a glimpse into like real life in the Empire.
Well, you need a Luthien in order to have a rebellion.
Right.
You need a Cassian to have a rebellion. You need someone that's they straddles both sides of the line, right? Because he has to, because that's what you have to do. But let me give you another little reminder in a sense. I believe there was a group of young guys in the 13 colonies that were pulling different types of acts and stunts to go against English rule, and they had to do that. They had to be that guy or those people in order to make their revolution happen.
Right.
Which we can have the discussion, which again could probably take up 30 podcasts, about which one was better. Did it really matter? Because when the British left here, things might have been better, and that's usually what happens too. And I think we were kind of seeing it with Ahsoka, Mandalorian. Things are better at first, and you kind of hit that peak, and now what? How do you keep it all together? Which kind of seems to be the theme of this episode in a sense, because we keep going back to it. How do you keep it from falling apart? It's not that easy. You need, all these people to be on board in order to keep the peace or to keep the ideals moving forward. And that's not an easy thing to do. I also think the scene between Luthen and Cassian in that like storage area
Warehouse.
where they're going back and forth, you could almost see Luthien's purposely prodding him to almost turn him. We talk about turning to the light or turning to the dark side. He's turning this guy into a rebel. Like he like you guys said, he sees that moment and he asks these questions, right? It kind of reminds me of this guy that I see on Facebook Reels a lot. And he talks about selling and how you're always going to get people to say yes by asking questions a certain way. And that's kind of, hold on a second. Like excuse me. That's kind of what Luthien does, right? He's asking him a series of questions to get Cassian to go, oh yeah, like you're right, or you're kind of turning me, even to the point that when that things start falling down from the ceiling, Cassian shows his true self and pushes Luthien out of the way so he doesn't get hurt. Would Cassian from episode, like the first episode or second episode, done that? I don't know. He might have gone after that box and taken it and gotten out of there because that's what would have been best for him. Was it really best for him to save Luthien? I don't know. He knew how to get out. He knew where to go. He knew what he had to do. So we kind of see that turn starting to happen right there, and Luthien taking that leap of faith, like we need this guy. And sometimes when you need that guy, in situations like that, you'll do whatever it takes to get that guy. And we see it here. That's why, to both your points again, that's why this might be the best Star Wars show right now, because like we continue to say, we're asking those deeper questions beyond, the light side and the dark side. I mean, everything we're seeing in this show makes us question, probably makes us question our own morals. It makes us question the government. What's good and bad? Is it, you're going to pick one of the lesser evils. You've heard that before too, right? Like, it's not really good, but it's the lesser of the two evils, so I guess I'll take that one. I think we're seeing a lot of that, and especially as Master Cillian Moss and I know, as you progress through this series, that comes to light even more. Stop there for right now.
I have two more quick hits before we start talking about what we thought of it. Again, I just love little dialogue asides, and one of my favorites of these two episodes, besides the conversations with Cassian and Luthen, when Cassian wants to go off-world, he goes to basically the bus depot, the shuttle depot, and tries to book passage. And he says, I need to get out of here. Well, the guy's like, when? He's like, today. And he's like, give me a number. Cassian tells him, and the guy quotes him a price, like 1,000 credits. And I just, right away, he's just like, give me a real number. And I loved that, just sort of, give me a real number. And I also, every single one of us, regardless of how old or young you are, if you've ever been in public transportation, an airplane, a bus, just waiting in a lobby, you've had that conversation that Luthen has when he arrives on Ferrex with the man who just won't stop talking to him, and the look of disdain that comes through without really being rude, but just the way he looks at him as if he was an insect in a jar. Like Luthen would just as soon just whip out a blaster and silence this fellow. And the guy just cheerfully says, "Oh, they'll get you with the fees, and it's too expensive. And what are you into?" "Oh, I'm into, and he doesn't answer him. And there's not a single question of his that he answers. He just stares at him. And it's just a wonderful moment because we've all been there, darn it. We've all just
Oh,
basically
absolutely.
said, like, just leave me alone. Like, I'm just here to do my thing and get out of town. So I thought I loved that whole thing.
Truly, one of those brilliant moments. And we described Andor in the last episode as being, kind of the grown-up version of Star Wars, if you will, if there is such a thing. And it's really shining through. Like, as an adult, I really appreciate this show. It's moments like that and the moral questions and sort of it's not as black and white as your traditional Star Wars. There aren't good guys and bad guys. It's very much shades of gray, and as we are the graying Jedi, it's perfect for us. I think it's a really good opportunity here, though, to ask the question of what else is the rebellion in this case. There is a sequence at the very end of this episode 3, where you get shots of all these people that Cassian has touched, all their lives, and the idea of this reckoning. Is it the reckoning of Cassian, or is it the rebellion reckoning? Is it an awakening in that sense? I'll give you my take first, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts. My take is that, and we mentioned this in the first episode when we started talking about Andor, is this is the journey to radicalization. And that takes many shapes and many forms, and it takes many triggers. This is the event that is opening up these hearts and minds to the idea of fighting against these forces that just kind of came in and forced themselves upon this place to find one person. Now, that one person you might blame for what just happened, but you realize that, like, the real problem is the second guy. The second guy gets the flag, right? That's just real adult life. Like, yeah, this guy's kind of a jerk, but it's not really his fault. It's the guy that shot this guy, or it's the guy that ransacked my apartment, or it's the guy that, just walked through our working space and just completely disrespected us. Like, I mean, these are real life people, in the fictional sense, of course, getting turned to something, even though they may have been the next person to turn Cassian Andor in. And that, I think, is really very unique, but also very telling of the human condition. So I found that to be a brilliant finish to this episode. So I want to know what you guys think.
I want to zoom in on a moment in that sequence, and it's with his friend Brasso. Now, we've already seen in episode 1 when he comes to him and says, basically, I need an alibi for last night, and they talk back and forth on how that's going to look. And Brasso is the guy who gets up dutifully, goes in and works in the scrap yards all day, an honest day's wages, while Cassian's off, doing his get-rich-quick stuff. So Brasso does something heroic, and I say heroic in the sense that he's trying to help Cassian and maybe strike a blow against the authorities, and he rigs their dropship. Like, there's a brief shot of him walking away from the dropship, and then later when it tries to take off, it's been cabled, and the cabling, in fact, he commits homicide because the cabling throws the ship into the superstructure of the wreckage, the scrap, and blows up the pilot and the ship, presumably. And then we cut to, as you say, this montage of people of Ferrix sort of maybe having their awakening. And here's Brasso. He never actually stood there and watched what he did, but he knew what his actions were likely to foretell. He may have seen the explosion afterwards. And he looks haunted in the cantina. Like, I've taken a life. I don't know why. I don't know what Cassian has done. He's my friend. He owes me money, and he's not very honest with me. Like, what line did he ask me to cross that I willingly crossed as his friend, but now I have to live with those consequences? And I think, whether it's Marva or Bix or Brasso or any of it, it's like you say, it's an awakening. It's sort of their eyes are open to, we can no longer just trust the status quo. We can no longer just get up, move through our day, eat our supper, go to sleep with the boss, I mean, things have changed. They've crossed a Rubicon, and we're in a whole new territory, and their lives will never be the same again. And I think what I was hitting on in the earlier episode, part of the episode, is that Cassian is completely oblivious to any of that emotional reckoning or wreckage that he leaves behind. Like, again, his interest is in his neck. It's getting off planet now with Luthen, whom he doesn't trust necessarily. But, you know, he's not thinking about, I've got to go back and help Bix, or I've got to go back and get Marva and B2. Like, he's, you know, and that to me is interesting. The selfishness, I guess, and how will that be, like, sort of leached out of him or drummed out of him by the time we reunite with his character in Rogue One? How does that escape? And like you say, it could be this idea of radicalization. Like, how do you go from someone who doesn't give a crap about the world to, this is my cause, right? This is my banner. This is the flag I hold up proudly. I'm on Team Rebellion, Team Rebel Alliance, and my cause is worthy. So, I mean, I think that's what we're seeing there.
I think that in order to get to the greater good or the greater cause, it's got to affect you personally first, because that's going to get you there. So for him to even start going down this path, he's looking out for himself first, which when we've seen a lot of these hero stories in Star Wars, they've either gone through, which is nothing wrong with it, right? Because it's your typical story. They've gone through some kind of trauma, or some kind of an experience, like whatever, but they're already going down that good path in a sense. And I think here, which their path was already aligned with the greater good already, like that path had already been established. We're seeing how someone who's trying to save themselves eventually morphs into, oh, I am going to help the greater good. It turns into that. And I think that's, like we continue to say, that's what's so compelling about this show, is that it's diving into a lot of real world things. I mean, how many historical things have we already referenced in this podcast? Which, by the way, if you want to hear more things like that, you should definitely click that subscribe button down below so you can join the hundreds and eventually thousands and eventually millions of fans that will be following Pending Rebrand and all the wonderful shows that we put out. But we've brought up historical context in how in this, and that's what we're seeing here, right? Like, this show is taking so many pieces of that. It's more than just good versus evil, which is what a lot of Star Wars has been about. Even though I think they're trying to make a break from that, and there's nothing wrong with that's what it was about, because we're also living in a world at that time where there was a very fine line between what's good and evil. Nowadays, you have to, you even after checking multiple sources, you don't know what's true and what's not. Especially with the situation that's going on right now. I can't tell you how many different accounts or things that I've read or people, experts that have been talking, and I've gone from, I agree with this, no, I agree with this side, no, I'm with this, now I'm with that, because nothing is black and white anymore. It's gray, like us.
Ooh.
But that's how it lines up with this show. It's a great reflection of what we're experiencing today historically.
And that's the story Tony Gilroy wants to tell us. I
And
mean,
he's
that's what I'm
doing
saying.
it. So
When he
Tony,
said,
you're doing
I
it
don't
right
have
now.
loyalty to Star Wars, I want to tell this story. It just happens to align with the principles and ideals of a larger galaxy, if you will. And I love your point, Uther, about it has to be personal for you. It has to be when your own self-interests fall into alignment with whatever ideals or principles that your, quote, revolution and rebellion is formed upon. Once those two become in sync, then obviously then you can become that person who will sacrifice all for the cause or the greater good or what have you. But until, like you say, until it hits home.
Well, it's almost like you have to catch up to it, right? Like, he's going to catch up to the cause. What's affecting him is going to get him to catch up to the cause.
Right.
So, anyway, all right, let's rate this bad boy.
Absolutely. Now we give it the color of the lightsaber. And I'll kick it off this week because I was enthralled. Both of these episodes were fantastic. I give them both green lightsabers all the way.
I do as well. Glowing green, wonderful, beautiful Yoda lightsabers. There's no doubt in my mind. This series is really taking Star Wars in a different direction, somewhere it needs to go.
It's the Green Uno card this week, ladies and gentlemen, for these episodes. If I had to rate them separately, and like I say, I kind of treat them as just one big 90-minute show, I might have gone with a cerulean blue for the second episode because it really was almost like an appetizer, moving the pieces, that classic moving the pieces into place episode. All the payoff comes in the third episode, Reckoning. But jointly, if I'm going to rate them together, let's go with Emerald Green this week.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to more Andor. I'm really excited. I'm glad we decided to go in this direction because this is kind of the Star Wars I've always hoped for. It's a little bit more highbrow, a little bit more contemplative. If you all out there here in this hemisphere or abroad in other hemispheres or in galaxies far, far away want to keep up with our analysis of Andor and or a future Star Wars content and all of our other shows, again, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, drop us a comment. What did you think about episodes 2 and 3 of Andor? Would you like to have seen a little more Skarsgård? I know I did. And with that, we will leave you with a May the Force be with you.
And also with you.
You're in the hands of an adolescent.
Mystery. I don't like mysteries. Get bellyache. I got a movie right now. Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. I am Urza Master. Joining me as always, Lord Uther, and today's special recurring guest host, FBI Regional Director Gordon Cole. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome, welcome. And a hearty welcome to our viewers here in the States and to our good friend Deb Simmeru abroad and others across the pond. We are delving into our 38th Warp Core episode today with two very fine, one rather cheeky, one not so cheeky episode, both with an interesting premise. And I gotta be frank, fellas, I'm excited to hear the background on these episodes, so I'm gonna throw it right away over to FBI Regional Director Gordon Cole.
Thank you, Ursa Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. Thank you, Deb, and all of you listening, watching, and playing at home. I am FBI Regional Director Gordon Cole from Oregon. And today we're talking Trek. In fact, we're talking Trek today, tomorrow, and yesterday. Particularly today's episode that launches us. Tomorrow is yesterday, which first aired on January 26th, 1967. The director is Michael O'Hurley, and I want to take a moment and shout out to Michael O'Hurley, not just for the fine job of directing he does on Tomorrow is Yesterday, but the fact that by winning the birth lottery, he was the younger brother of Dan O'Hurley, one of my favorite late-in-life actors who came to my attention with his immortal performance as Connell Cochran in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. He then underwent a ton of FX makeup as Grig in The Last Starfighter, the young ally to Alex Rogan. And for all you Twin Peaks fans out there, he was the nefarious Andrew Packard who faked his own death to get back at his wife, Josie, and ended up getting blown up in a bank. Spoiler alert.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yes. They actually never found a body, but it didn't look good for Andrew at the end of season 2.
That's why I said
Anyways, Dan O'Herlihy was fantastic, and his younger brother stayed behind the camera and did a lot of TV. Now, many of these directors we've talked about for the first season of Star Trek, they all cut their teeth on the same classic shows, Bonanza, Wild Wild West. But some of Michael's credits, which I thought stood out because he worked well into the 1980s, Hawaii Five-0, the original, MASH, cut his teeth on some Korean War comedy. The A-Team, Riptide, which was a less successful Stephen J. Cannell series that followed the A-Team, and Miami Vice, which was the coolest show back in 1985. Pastels, Detectives Without Socks, an alligator on board a yacht, et cetera, et cetera. So,
beautiful filmmaking.
Yes,
TV
Michael and Dan, the O'Herlihy family, we give our props here at the Warp Core. The episode was written
in relation to the Hurley boy.
Exactly.
Spelled similarly.
Indeed. The writer was DC Fontana, a female writer on staff who would assume the role of story editor. Worked closely with Gene Roddenberry. We discussed DC and Roddenberry's at times contentious relationship when we discussed the first episode of the first season that she contributed to, and that was Charlie X. This was the second episode that DC worked on. Behind the scenes, it was Roddenberry. It was now the young producer Gene L. Kuhn, and it would also be Fontana, who would now be steering the ship in terms of getting things in front of the camera and writing those things to say on camera. So we're starting to see now the production team, for better or worse, gel, and these are the voices that will carry Trek through its 3 seasons on NBC. This episode was actually supposed to be, and we talked about this on a prior Warp Core episode, shame on you if you didn't catch it, when we discussed the Naked Time, in which Sulu was running around with the rapier, and the crew was feeling a little frisky, thanks to a virus that had been spreading ship-wide. At the end of that episode, in order to save the ship, they did something with engineering that only Scotty could pull off, and he did it so well, the ship accidentally started going backwards in time. Now, that incident was supposed to set the stage for this episode of Trek. This was going to, again, be the second part of that, where the Enterprise gets flung backwards in space-time and has to get back to the present day. They decided to sever the two. They made this one a separate standalone. And what's fascinating is we kind of start this episode in medias res. They've already been flung backwards through circumstances described in the captain's log as remarkably similar to what they encountered at the end of Naked Time. So they basically just said, all right, well, we got too close to a black hole type, and suddenly we find ourselves in present day Earth space. So it's interesting. It is sort of tied still, if you will, if you really want to look for the connections, but it's supposed to be treated as a standalone. And when the episode begins, let me just say, stock footage rules. I don't care in what era, when you can go back and see like Air Force jets at the time and just try to imagine yourself. People are like, wow, it's right now. It's ripped from today's headlines. They just ran a camera out there and shot. So it was always fun to see like the pre-Top Gun fighters being scrambled and so forth. It gave me a very Galactica 1980 vibe, and you should Google that if you know your Battlestar Galactica, in which they brought the ship into 1980s Earth and tried to have Cylon Raiders over Los Angeles, and it got weird quickly, but this again gave me that in a cheerfully nostalgic kind of way. So, all right, some initial thoughts on this one, gentlemen. I love the way that Leonard Nimoy has not only found his voice in Spock after initially playing him a bit more unrestrained, let's say, in the two pilots or the 2 episodes that served as pilots, one that initially never aired and was repackaged as the Menagerie, and the other one, Where No Men Have Gone Before, which actually was episode 4, which we also covered in a prior Warp Core. Friends, go back and watch all those great episodes of the Warp Core. Get your captain's logs updated, because you're just missing out on some fantastic content. Controversial, funny, exciting. It's all there. But Leonard Nimoy, he has found the perfect balance of severe, as his logical side will dictate, but also able to drop some of those quips that we give Ethan Peck a lot of credit for in Strange New World. In this one, we start off with the ship in disarray. There's chairs overturned, the power's all on the fritz, and Spock updates Kirk by saying, if Mr. Scott is still with us, we should have auxiliary power momentarily. Then the lights and the consoles all backlight up, and Spock looks at it and just says, Mr. Scott is still with us. And it's just such a great, again, just very, very dry, and I don't know if he had to fight to get that in the way it did. And they move right on. It's not like they cement the joke and, run a little funny, little stinger. Although the musical stingers in Tomorrow Is Yesterday do make a little bit of a reappearance there. Not enough. It's not a shore leave type situation, but they do have the little here's some wacky background music.
Definitely more artfully done in this episode.
Yes, no, it was mercifully short. And I mean, again, I think part of that might have been, and I'm just speculating here, I don't have any pure inside information on this particular point, but don't forget, this show was produced by Desilu, by Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz's company, who of course were responsible for the global smash I Love Lucy. And this doesn't exactly fit into the portfolio as neatly as a situational comedy, contemporary, looking at marriage and life and all above. So I don't know if some of those moments in this show that are intended to be lighter, that they're just sort of inserted there. That could have been a producer's note, that could have been like Desilu, hey, let's lighten them up a little. They're all so serious. I don't know. It feels plausible that they might have wanted to, with knowing what their audience was for the show they were churning out, that they didn't want Star Trek to become this overtly grim, and that could have been Roddenberry, and it could have been all sorts of different voices. Again, even with shore leave, it doesn't truly detract from the episode enough to make you turn your back on it, but it does stand out a little because this show has great tension, right? This show is like, you honestly, how many times have we seen the time travel trope? We still want to know how they gonna fix this. What is their master plan to get back and right the ship, literally and metaphorically? And as it turns out, I was so excited to see that that great big ball of fire in the sky is exactly their starting point. Again, remembering that I had seen very few of these episodes up until now, I always thought that they invented that in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, slingshotting around the sun. But no, it was here, and I was all for it, and I was very excited. And in fact, if I go back and watch Star Trek IV now, I think McCoy says, sure, we've done it before. And it's just, again, the line will go right over your head if you're not paying attention. But now I'm going to pay attention and realize, yes, they have done this before. And Spock did the calculations. And again, I'm glad that Paramount did some digital effects work to make it a little more, I'm sure it was a little awkward in the original broadcast. But boy, to see the slingshot maneuver, that was a lot of fun there. So, but my big picture note early with this was I loved the Kirk. This is something that Lord Uther has brought about. Like, why does Lord Uther think Kirk is the best captain and so forth? And I think a lot of those qualities show up in this episode in bits and pieces and chunks. Look at the fight scene between Kirk and 3 Air Force guards, and then compare some of the ones that we said might have dragged on a little in Shore Leave or Arena. Like, this one's just insane, right? He's like literally throwing his body horizontally across a room.
Wrestling match.
Right. I mean, and it's
cross-body toss right there.
Right, and it's edited very like frenetically, like for the time, I'm sure. It's not the slow motion punch, et cetera, et cetera. There's a real just kind of messiness to it that I loved. Like, I wish more fight scenes like that are there because, like I said, it just felt like anything goes. Like, there didn't matter what props were there. There's Kirk getting thrown against the wall. And I mean, so I loved that physicality of it. And then when he's being interrogated by the Air Force, is that a uniform you're wearing? Oh, this little thing? Just something I slipped on. Like that impishness and playfulness of James Kirk there. And so I think this episode, and I think the one that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, also, I think these are two really good Kirk episodes, and you guys can speak to that and so forth in terms of, he represents the character really well, and so that might be direction, that might be Mike Hurley, but I think that they pulled out some pretty good representative performances from the main cast here, and I guess I throw it out to Ursa and Uther. What were your impressions of Mr. Shatner in these tales?
First of all, it's Lord Uther. Please don't just call me Uther.
Thank go to Lord school for 17 years.
There, Gordon Cole. Maybe your hearing aids aren't working that well there, Gordon.
What?
Anyway, sorry, Urza Master, I'm cutting you off. Just real
you're
quick.
good.
This episode needed a visit from the Department of Temporal Police is what this episode needed, because there's so much. Don't mess with the timeline. Like, there's so much messing with the timeline that the timeline should have been really messed up going forward. They escort this guy onto the bridge, and Uhura's like, "Ooh, let me give you a tour." I mean, he's gonna take all that stuff back with him. It's just it's not good. And then they beam that other guy, that prison guard up, and they don't let him leave the transporter room. And then he's like, "Oh, I would like chicken soup," and he's going through all the cards to find chicken soup. So somewhere on the USS Enterprise are different floppy disks that have meals on them, and you just plug them into the replicator, and then the guy touches the soup and touches his tongue, and then you got some of the campy music, beep beep beep, or whatever it was. Yeah, that it was supposed to be funny. So the timeline somehow didn't get corrupted, and I don't know how, because it was just a blatant messing with it. Go ahead, Urza.
Wonderful. It was wonderful, and this is, I believe, in Star Trek canon, this particular journey back in time is the reason for the Temporal Prime Directive. I believe. Now, Discovery may have rewritten that history a little bit, but ultimately, this is where this trope. Well, I mean, this is the first time we've seen it, right? So this is the birth of the time travel trope, which is, of course, exemplified in Star Trek IV, my favorite Star Trek movie of the original series cast. And also, by the way, dedicated to the Challenger disaster, which I'd like to go on record and apologize for my prior jab at the Challenger disaster. That was entirely meant as tongue-in-cheek. But our hearts do go out to the victims of that tragedy. 40 some odd years later, it's still a national sad point. We do respect that. And the cast and crew dedicated that movie for the same reason that, this episode is essentially dedicated to the hopefulness of the future. A lot going on here that's, I don't know about you fellas, but I think is we talk about foundational episodes, and this episode sets you up for all of Trek and blah, blah, blah. This is the relationship setup. We see the back and forth between Spock and McCoy, the back and forth between Sulu and Captain Kirk. We see the Captain Kirk playing with, quote-unquote, the enemy and or, the frenemy in this case, where he's trying to sort of subtly get himself out of something. And we see, of course, the way that others act to being on the Enterprise and having knowledge they shouldn't have. which comes up in various forms throughout the rest of the series, throughout every Star Trek series in some way, shape, or form when they break the Prime Directive of whatever form they're breaking it, because why have a Prime Directive if you can't play around with it, right? So, I really enjoyed the chicken soup scene. I think stuck out as probably, well, it's the first time we see a replicator.
Yeah.
But it's also the first time you really see somebody like, I don't even know how to put it, like almost like a Hogan's Heroes-esque surprise moment where it like he almost looks at the camera and goes, huh? And I mean that comedic moment alone, it's very 50s TV. Like there was a lot of that breaking of the fourth wall to get the laugh, to get the pop of the audience. And I agree with Director Cole here that this is definitely Desilu. I think that there was a voice behind the voices that are named who said, you know what, this could be very, kind of serious. It's, maybe poking fun at the military during a time when that was really not the thing to do. Kind of making them look like buffoons or making it look easy to break into a top secret, potentially facility, which, it's not like, we're just fresh out of the McCarthy era, I think, at this point, or maybe we're even in it at this point. So there's something to be said about not necessarily censorship, but being cautious about how you're painting the present. Now you can do it through the lens of, the utopian future where they look back, but you can't really do it from the lens of like, oh, modern day buffoons are running the military. So you have to find a way to kind of ground it and legitimize it and take the buffoonery and put it into, shall we say, more digestible for the military idiom. So, having him on the ship, getting the chicken soup. And why chicken soup? Of all the things, like, steak dinner or, surf and turf, something else, but chicken soup? That alone is kind of campy. And then, I could see, Lucille Ball visiting, the soundstage one day, getting the gist of the episode and saying, throwing a little humor here or there. But of course, you get all of the natural humor between the cast as well. You get the, shouldn't you be doing some calculations, Mr. Spock? I am. I mean, that's the acting in this episode. For as much as people tend to joke about how William Shatner overacts, or certain things are just played up because they're supposed to be jokey and silly, I think we actually get some real brilliance in acting here that separates you from, I know I'm watching a TV show, to I am watching characters interacting. And this is where I think, if I'm being honest, I think this particular episode is where I truly start to believe that Leonard Nimoy is Spock, and DeForest Kelley is Bones, and William Shatner is James T. Kirk, and George Takei is Sulu. Like, these moments with these characters, I've started to lose my separation from these prior appearances they've had on television or stage. And now they've kind of solidified into, this is who they're going to be forever. And we get some of like the penultimate interactions that we're going to talk about time and time again. And if you're a subscriber here at Pending Rebrand, for free, you can go back to our very first few episodes and see our episodes on the Star Trek movies. And as the cast ages, sometimes gracefully, sometimes not so gracefully, you can see that no matter how old they get, they are always this core group of characters, even if Scotty gets to be kind of old and rotund, even if William Shatner is not the same athlete he used to be, even if Uhura has decided to, become a mom and walk a little slower. Like, it's fantastic. And likewise, when we get into Next Generation, I'm sure I'll bring this point up again about Picard and, of course, Patrick Stewart. I mean, you can't unsee the character when you see the actor. And this, I think, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I'd love to get your opinions on this. I think this is the episode where that happens.
No, absolutely. Again, the Spock appearances in this week's Warp Core, I think, truly 100%. He is now. He knows how to play it. Now he gets a little bit fed up with it by the time Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan reaches theaters. But that was another backstory. But he nails it. I love the moment where they're going to put the Captain Christopher. They're going to beam him down to the base so that he can help them, find the photos and the computer logs. And Spock literally directs him to the transporter pad because he doesn't know where to stand. He just sort of stands there, and Spock's like, "Here, over here, stand right there," and does it all silently. And it's just a great little bit there. When I saw Sulu on the away mission, again, I loved those two working together. But again, just knowing the complicated backstory between the characters, all I could think about was, so at what point did the relationship behind the scenes kind of start to sour? Did Shatner say something disparaging, in between takes? Was it this episode? Was it? So it's fascinating to see them work so closely together on screen, knowing that there was a little bit of frostiness, definitely, when the director yelled "cut." And I don't know the exact
Just to jump
moment.
on that.
What's that?
Yeah, I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to jump
go
on
ahead.
that because this is our chance to bring it to today, right? Is there ever been a hatchet you guys want to see buried more than between Bill Shatner and George Takei? My background on this is it sounds like there wasn't a real hard falling out until the 90s, after Star Trek 6. And it seemed like they were kind of off and on up until maybe the turn of the century, and then the last 20 or so years they've really kind of been negative. And I don't know for what reason that is, or I'm sure there's somebody can drop us a comment and say, well, it was actually May 7th, 1994, William Shatner pooped at George Takei's house and didn't flush. Yeah, whatever the case may be. I really would love to know, because that's one of those Hollywood feuds that, look, I mean, they're in their 80s, pushing 90, or I think Bill Shatner might be in his 90s at this point.
93.
Yeah, why not just and this is an opportunity for Paramount Plus to bring these two actors to bear on a special and say, all right, let's have a talk it out. Let's do a screening of, hey, this episode has a lot of Sulu and Kirk. How about you guys walk us through, what was your feelings of working together at the time? Where did things go wrong? And can we put this to rest? I mean, you guys, look, we're only given so much time. We've already lost Nichelle Nichols, James Doohan, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley. We've only got a couple of the crew left. Can we put this aside and work on a brighter future? So that's my challenge to William Shatner and George Takei, because they're big fans. And hi, Brad, nice to see you. And I forget Bill Shatner's wife's name, but hello to her as well. Love to visit the horse farm sometime, Bill. You can have us there. We'll do a live Warp Core from the horse ranch. But I would love to see those two work it out. And look, I mean, you don't have to forgive and forget. I don't necessarily believe in that. But you could get over it, right? I mean, we're all adults here. We all say things to each other or have things said to us that we go, "Brr." And then later on we go, you know what? Whatever. Now granted, feelings can be hurt, things can be said, but that's the opportunity to say, you know what? We've known each other for 70 years? Why don't we just put this one to bed and just say, we're old farts, and old farts sometimes got to just, agree to disagree or agree to let things go. So I hate to derail us for that, but it's one thing, it's always bothered me that there's this bad blood back there, because they're both tremendously talented individuals. They're icons. I'd like to see, icons sort of take the high road on stuff. I know they're human, but it'd be nice to see them, because they've, for generations, inspired people to be better people, right?
Hey, if the Eagles can do it, Takei and Shatner can bury the hatchet.
Can't we all just get along?
But yes, and Urza Master,
spoken like a true Los Angelite.
Yeah, you're a younger guy with director Cole and I being a little bit older here, and I think as you get a little older, you're supposed to be burying the hatchet on a lot of things, because you start realizing that, your experiences in life make you who you are, and there's not that much time left, which might sound weird coming from a 51-year-old that there's not a lot of time left, but I'm on the other side of my life, right? And so you would think that the same would be for these two guys who know that. Here's the thing. They know they're legendary, right? They know they're iconic. And when Bill, which, hopefully I'm not foreshadowing anything here, but when William Shatner dies, I'm probably going to shed some tears because that's a big part of my life. It's kind of like when Glenn Fry died. A couple of my good friends, we were texting, and my one friend, Keith Romer, was saying, he goes, I'm crying right now because Glenn Fry, the Eagles, are such a huge part of my life, of our lives, that this is it. That's the ending of something, right? And same goes here. Bill Shatner's 92, I was wrong. George Takei is 86. Just let it go. So I like your idea of having a summit for the two of them.
We could do it on the Warp Core podcast. They could join us anytime. I will buy them donuts.
Mark this down now because I am going to try and get in touch with Mr. Takei, and I want to know when all this started going down because I don't think that story's ever been told about how their relationship started to break apart and where it happened. So we're going to get him on here, and he's going to tell us the story. Trust me, I'll work my sources. Yes.
There you go.
Spill the tea, as the young
FBI Director
say.
Cole, can you get us some contact info? You tap phones all the time, right?
Absolutely. I'll work my people. There were a lot of karate chops in this episode, including Sulu getting one in there. So that was the martial art of choice back in 1967.
Judo chop.
We were thinking of comedic moments. Kirk and the saucy computer also came in. You can measure your own success or failure there, but I loved his response. Computer, you will not refer to me like that. And then it just ignored him and so forth. So again, trying to reach for a little bit of levity.
Now there's a trope that they didn't ever echo, I don't think. I'd really be intrigued to see that happen again.
And that just plays into his love of the ship too. That just hit me now. He loves the ship, and it's almost like the ship loves him.
Wants to love him back. Now we're going to
look, ladies and gentlemen. Here's something that you have to understand. You're not going to find this type of analysis about a person loving a ship and a ship loving a person. Then you'll find right here on the Warp Core. So what you need to do is click that subscribe button down below, so you can get some more content about people loving things and those things loving them back.
We're just big lovers here, especially Director Cole.
Not
he
fighters.
Loves everybody.
Yes, I love them all. And then we got, to piggyback on that, we got some new information about NCC 1701. We found out there's only 12 like it in the fleet, which I don't think we'd ever referenced how many Constellation-style starships were out there, and that there's 430 crew members. So again, little fun facts that you can put in your Starfleet binder and carry with it. So overall, and we'll get to rating them in a little while, but tomorrow is yesterday. There was plenty of good stuff in there and a little goofiness, but again, we're gonna chalk that up to just trying to give us a full menu of Star Trek options. Star Trek Court Martial tends to play it pretty straight, and deservedly so. First aired on February 2nd, 1967. The director is Trek vet by now Mark Daniels, who again is the co-leader of most directed episodes of the original series with 14. You've seen Mr. Daniels' work. We've discussed him and his career. He did the first part of The Menagerie. He did The Naked Time. He did The Man Trap. So he knows his way around. The writers, it was a co-writing. Stephen Karabastos did the story and co-wrote the script. He will also write Operation Annihilate at the end of our first season and our big first season finale of the Warp Core coming soon. Karabastos, he was the story editor, but it was a short tenure. It didn't quite click with Roddenberry's visions, kept getting rewritten, et cetera, so he bailed about midway through season 1 here and was replaced by DC Fontana, who just wrote Tomorrow Was Yesterday and Charlie X. So you won't get to kick Stephen around too much, but he was a contributing voice here to Court Martial. The real surprise interest in this backstory is his co-writer Don Mankiewicz. Now Don is the son of legendary screenwriter Herman Mankiewicz. And how legendary is he? Well, David Fincher did a biopic of Herman Mankiewicz a couple of years ago called Mank that premiered on Netflix, and he was portrayed by Gary Oldman in that biopic. So if you wanted to see, if that's a Fincher film that you have missed from your oeuvre, that might be worth checking out for you. Herman Mankiewicz, Don's father, Don writes Star Trek. Herman wrote big scripts. He co-wrote Citizen Kane with Orson Welles, often considered the greatest motion picture ever made by many that you ask. Herman Mankiewicz wrote The Wizard of Oz, Pride of the Yankees. I mean, he was as big a deal in Hollywood in the late 30s, 40s, etc., as you could ever find. In fact, it's not really even comparable to a modern writer. Besides, you'd have to go like Aaron Sorkin or, David Mamet back in the day or so forth, where his name alone would guarantee an audience. Anyways, Don was his son, and Don worked on Star Trek. So we had those two kind of doing it. Now, Gene L. Kuhn, they'd blown a lot of money on Balance of Terror and some of these other episodes here, Arena. So they needed a, quote, a ship in a bottle episode. And they basically wanted to do it on one set. So they said, all right, write me a courtroom drama where all we have to have is like 4 guys sitting at a table and the defendant and so forth. Now, of course, by the time the episode was finished written, we had a whole 10 forward bar, and we had a Commodore's office, and we ended up getting 5 different sets regardless. So the best intentions. Poor Gene Kuhn. He's just trying to save money, and they just get, what do you mean we have a new set? What the heck is this? Who approved this? But anyways, that was the impetus behind this at Starbase 11. And it's a good bar scene. When Kirk and Leonard McCoy come in, just for a nightcap, and you have the classic, everyone's looking at them, because they believe that Kirk has gone and done something that we in our hearts know James Kirk would never do, which is basically shoot a guy off into space with malice and intent and so forth. It undercuts the episode only so slightly in that we just never for a second believe that that's behavior Kirk could do, under any circumstance, even if he hated the guy. We just know the integrity and honesty of Kirk, which is why I said prior, but I think these episodes really establish him as the captain and a really great leader to follow. And I contrast that a little with Spock and the Menagerie, because the slight difference, I guess, in terms of presentation, we see Spock breaking rules in real time. We see him diverting the ship, falsifying orders, going to such lengths to deceive and so forth, so that when they do take him into custody and put him on trial, we're trying to reconcile those facts in our own head. We saw Spock do this. Why would he do it? What is the motivation? And I think one thing that slightly works against Court Martial for a good period of the episode before we get the final flashbacks to see what really was going on, is that we're being told what happened. And that's why we have a hard time accepting that Kirk would do that. We have a hard time believing that he would do this on Yellow Alert. And the fact is that, the writing, they tell us that. And it's not until, 2/3 of the way in that we actually start to see what really happened and how it all went down. So, but the bar scene, I love there was just great writing, back and forth tension, it could have just been so obvious, we don't serve your kind here, murderer. But I mean, they were very much saying your ship's being repaired.
I have the death penalty on 7 systems.
Exactly. They're is how the repairs coming, Jim? Oh yeah, that should be done pretty soon. Oh good, then you'll be moving on then. Well sure, you're in a hurry to get rid of me? And it's just, like I say, go back and rewatch some of those clips. it's actually restrained, and you still get that tension in there. And then again, we get a little bit of the flirty McCoy when he runs into the soon-to-be revealed prosecutor, and I think she says something like, "Oh, I know Jim. He's an old friend." And I love McCoy's follow-up. "All of my old friends look like doctors. All of his old friends look like you." And so it's just a little like, "Can I buy you a drink?" And in the future, I guess it's all Trader Vic's, because it's like when Jim has a drink with the prosecutor and she reveals that she's going to be putting him on trial, she's got like this weird Mai Tai thing with like 4 umbrellas and a huge straw. And I'm just like, you go, tiki. Jim has just a quiet cognac or brandy or something there in a little glass, but she's just all, purely tropical there. And again, we've talked about tropes. You guys might even have your favorite Star Trek trials through, Next Generation, the original series, and so forth. Strange New Worlds has done it already at least once with number 1 on trial. It never gets old when it's done well, right? I mean, and the more, again, if you've ever watched real courtroom proceedings, they can be deadly dull. They can be just a lot of, motions, and I'm not talking about the lurid murder trials that Lifetime will adapt into a TV movie, but I'm just saying general courtroom business is, by its nature, very bureaucratic, right? And does not have the zing of a Perry Mason or Law and Order or, LA Law type, the wow. So I think as viewers, we suspend our disbelief because we want the wow. We want the prosecutor presents evidence that they can't possibly work around. In this case, Kirk pressing the eject button while clearly on yellow alert. And then we want the defense to somehow get the witness to recant, confess. You can't handle the truth. Aaron Sorkin and his legendary play turned film, A Few Good Men. We want the theatrics. We want courtroom, things that would never pass mustard in a real courtroom, and you'd be cited for contempt, and the bailiff would take you into custody and so forth. But we want the histrionics and the over-the-top. And what's great is that we get both here, because we do get an exciting courtroom